Dear viewers, thank you for choosing Manhwa Compilation channel. Enjoy watching. His name is Sherlock. He is a great adventurer at heart. The world around had become too boring, so Sherlock decided to dilute this hopeless grayness with his own colors. Sherlock is a young, high-ranking demon, and his main desire is to live up to his status. From today, he became the master of the dungeon. This meant that those who were destined to become his guests would not be bored. The castle stretched out in front of the main character. Its greatness indicated that enormous strength and soul of the one who created it was invested in this structure. There was a dungeon under the walls of the castle. Every inch of this gloomy haven was saturated with fear and a sense of the unknown. It was the kingdom of darkness and death. This was the most mysterious place in the underground world. This world has its own laws. Only a demon who owns a dungeon is worthy of the title of Demon Lord. Creating a high-quality dungeon deserves the most respect. But there is another important aspect. The preparation of the army of evil. As a reward for his efforts, the Demon Lord will receive endless wealth. Sherlock was born a high-level demon, but grew up in the slums. They laughed at him since childhood. Even then, the young demon decided for himself that when he grew up, he would prove to everyone that he deserved the best. And now this makes him strive even more for wealth and the title of Demon Lord. After hundreds of years of struggle, the young man finally saved up for his first dungeon. Sherlock adhered to the principle, no matter where he was born and raised, he would still become the greatest demon. The young man was sure that he would build the best dungeon. To do this, it is important to use your demonic power, but it is also important to put a personal stamp. Both of these actions, demonic power and personal seal, will ultimately create the powerful creation and status that Sherlock so desired. And now, the hour has struck. Sherlock has become the rightful ruler of the dungeon. The reason he acquired the dungeon was special to him. It wasn't that the demon succubus from the sales department was flirting with him. The beautiful beast tried to convince Sherlock that this dungeon had good feng shui. She promised that this would contribute to the acquisition of wealth in the near future, and within 3 years the owner would become extremely successful. The reason for the acquisition was also not that it was full of diamonds, and also not because there is only a day's journey from the surface. Although, the Silas of Light will also be easier to organize a crusade against the owner. And of course, the reason why Sherlock bought this abandoned dungeon, in which he even had to restart the core, is not that he decided to test himself in this way. In fact, the reason turned out to be banal. The young demon did this because it was the only dungeon he could afford to buy. It was the cheapest in the underground world. But first, Sherlock needs to launch the core to kickstart his great project. So, said and done. The process has begun. Saber's servant appeared in touch, asking whether Sherlock was now his master. He smiled helpfully, awaiting instructions. Sherlock was confused at first. This was not indicated in the book. The first thing the young demon suspected was that the core was damaged. The servant, meanwhile, decided to clarify whether his new master came from another dimension or was still an aborigine. Sherlock was outraged by such assumptions. Calling him an aborigine is nonsense. The idea that the core was damaged was already gaining momentum. The demon was thinking about returning it to the saleswoman. Now it's clear why it was so cheap. In fact, everything turned out to be bad. Saber, hearing about this, immediately prayed that the master would not do this. As it turned out, the servant only learned these expressions in another world. In fact, it is not spoiled, everything is fine. Saber begged Sherlock not to return anything, otherwise he would not be sold for another 10,000 years. In return, the servant promised that the master would become the greatest demon lord. Having finished communicating with Saber, the young demon went to inspect all his possessions. Sherlock thought about the servant's words. He called the young man the greatest demon lord. Something else was surprising. This core turns out to be reasonable. Sherlock has never seen a talking core before. Perhaps this is some kind of rare species. Apparently the young man was just lucky to find this. The core is capable of speaking and thinking intelligently. This did not suit the young demon's plans. Sherlock knows that over 100 years, 100 rooms with dungeon monsters were dug up. Now, as the owner of the dungeon, the demon lord gave instructions to the servant. 10 kitchens need to be built, and also 10 interrogation rooms, 10 torture rooms, 2 training grounds. You also need to create a labyrinth that will tempt adventurers on the surface, and a library, as well as a luxurious bedroom and the richest treasury in the entire underground world. Saber, eyes widened in surprise, listened carefully to his master. The enthusiasm and zeal reflected in Sherlock's eyes also influenced the servant. The plans were grandiose. All that remained was to bring them to life. In the end, Saber made a promise that he would help Sherlock become the greatest demon lord. The young lord knew that dungeons of different levels could summon different monsters by using magical power and passing it through the core. Upgrading a dungeon is easy, you just need to buy cores or steal cores from other dungeons. Sherlock understood that if he fed the core of his dungeon with other cores, his class would increase. Sherlock's dungeon is currently the lowest level, so he could only summon goblins. In the end, the young man decided that enough words were enough. It was time to get to work. Such a quick decision puzzled the servant, so he decided to clarify something. Saber explained that according to the rules, if Sherlock hires goblins, then he will have to pay each goblin 5 magic stones per month as a salary. But there is another option that the servant shared. The dungeon lord can try to sign a contract with goblins from another world. The benefit of this proposal was that other people's goblins would not have to pay wages. On the contrary, they themselves will pay Sherlock. The young man asked what the goblins would pay him for. Saber revealed the secret. It turns out that in another world, these goblins are called donut pigs. Sherlock thought about the servant's proposal. The core's story sounded like something out of science fiction. But at the same time, the dungeon owner did not currently have enough magic stones to pay the goblins for their work. Although he can find magic stones in the process of expanding the dungeon, the main character looked around his possessions. The guy understood that given the geographical location of this dungeon, the likelihood of finding magic stones was too low. Whatever one may say, Sherlock will still have to accept Saber's offer. The young man asked how he could summon goblins from another world. The servant explained that first the demon needs to transfer magical power to his assistant, and then he needs to create a server that will connect the two worlds. This whole process will take a week, and it will require a lot of magical power. Saber noticed that his master was hesitating with the decision, so he carefully asked if the young man was ready for this. Sherlock was slightly offended that the servant doubted his magical power. After all, he was a demon of the highest level. The main character immediately activated the release of magic. The servant received all the necessary data and immediately began to analyze it. When the data analysis was completed, Saber began converting magic. After the conversion of magic was completed, the assistant began preparing for the transition to another dimension. The transition was successful. The next step was an attempt to receive a signal. The signal has been received 100%. Now all that remains is to create a server. The final stage took a week. The master invested enormous magical power into the creation of his server. Not surprisingly, this whole process took a lot of energy from Sherlock. Finally, Saber announced that the portal had been built. First of all, the servant decided to warn that goblins from another world do strange things. For example, they come up with names for themselves, and then create groups. They will also trade things with each other and fight for resources. Sherlock didn't expect that there would be so many problems with other people's goblins. Therefore, at the moment, the only thing he was interested in was whether these goblins could somehow be controlled. Saber was forced to upset all the masters. It would not be possible to control the goblins due to cultural differences. Although, it is most convenient to give them instructions through the official website. This was another surprise for Sherlock. It turns out they have an official website. The servant explained everything simply. It's like a place where two worlds converge. Sherlock didn't care much about all these strange hobbies of goblins from another world. For him, the main thing was that they did not have to pay wages. When the character of the goblins was more or less understood, Saber moved on to another issue. He told his master that his duties would be to protect and control the official dungeon website. You will also need to recruit workers and advertise yourself through the site. The servant expressed the hope that Sherlock would easily learn the language of another world and understand the management of the site. Now that the main aspects were decided, the Demon Lord was going to give the dungeon some nice name. And so the first players appeared. They were interested in whether the online game dungeon Eternal Kingdom was open for pre-order. People were interested in playing the new game. Saber explained that in the language of gamers, they are called testers. He said that the first requests have already appeared. Sherlock was quite surprised by this. He didn't even imagine that free labor would line up to get into his dungeon. The young man asked the servant how many goblins had already signed up. Saber happily reported that there are 80 million players in the other world, but one must take into account the scale of their kingdom. Therefore, this kingdom can only accommodate 100 players, so a selection will have to be made. So the selection was made. And finally, the long-awaited moment has arrived. Sherlock was ready to announce the start of the game. Special magic was put into the intro for the game. A bright scattering of stars promised unprecedented impressions. The recruitment of players for testing the game Eternal Kingdom has been opened. but only 100 lucky ones will be chosen. After some time, 100 players were selected and special notifications were sent to them. But that's not all. Before greeting the first players, Sherlock decided to do one important thing, in his opinion. Saber was intrigued by what this thing was. This important thing turned out to be a purchase. The main character intended to purchase pickaxes. Further events developed in the city of Boston. One of the goblins complained that he drank too much the day before, and his wife beat him. The poor guy pointed out that he didn't have an ear. His wife unscrewed it. At the same time, he assured everyone that he was not henpecked, but a real warrior. The goblin sitting next to him assured me that if he hits, it means he loves. It's not for nothing that they say so. Be that as it may, the first payment arrived, which Sherlock was very happy about. The main character thanked the goblins for their timely calculation. In the small market one could buy anything. There was meat of demonic beasts, precious stones, and even a box with a surprise, and in it was nothing more than a soul crystal. But the young demon was not interested in such goods. He considered it trash. Saber asked how many magic stones his master had with him. Sherlock admitted that it was only 1,000. That's all he had available. The young demon stopped in front of a door with a huge sign. Before entering, he wondered how much would be appropriate to spend. Inside, the main character found hard workers. One of them said that each guest could buy powder for a joke or ashes of grief. The seller assured that all their crafts were of very high quality, and the buyer would not regret his purchase. Sherlock immediately made it known that he came here for 3 reasons. First, buy an iron pickaxe. Secondly, buy a cheap iron pickaxe. Third, buy 100 cheap iron pickaxes. The seller, rubbing his hands, immediately announced the amount, 1,000 magic stones. The bonus was free delivery of the goods. The main character became thoughtful. It was expensive for him. After this, he will have no money left to feed the goblins. The experienced eye of the seller caught the buyer's confusion. He immediately assumed that the young man in front of him was a demon lord and was now setting up his new dungeon. On this occasion, the merchant decided to please the demon with a special offer. Due to the fact that their store was 100 years old, they were offering super discounts. For just 800 magic stones, you could buy a brand new blacksmith shop. There was everything you needed: smelting, forging, and even a mini kitchen. The demon liked the proposal, because now he himself will be able to make pickaxes. For 800 magic stones, he will receive a whole forge and 20 pickaxes as a gift. This will be profitable. Sherlock still decided to consult with Saber what he thought about this. The servant was of the same opinion as his master. If they get a forge, they will be able to forge not only pickaxes, but also other various things that can be sold to gamers. After hearing this, the main character was even more happy. Before that, he thought that equipment would have to be given to gamers for free, but all this, it turns out, can be sold. Saber explained that if gamers have money, they can buy everything at once, and if not, they will work. This is one of the features of the other world, so all things in the dungeon can be sold. Sherlock liked this prospect. He took out a bag of magic stones. The decision was taken. The young man put the bag in front of the seller. He agreed to buy the forge. The purchase was profitable, because with the remaining magic stones, the dungeon lord would be able to feed the goblins. The guy couldn't wait to see how the goblins from another world got to work. But Saber reported one more nuance. First, you need to display quests for beginners. Sherlock was surprised again. He didn't know what quests were. The servant explained that quests are a term from another world. Beginners must complete small tasks so that they can understand the game mechanics and understand the interface. The assistant also added that players do not need to pay a monthly salary. They must complete quests to earn money and experience. The young man did not even imagine that in reality everything would be more complicated. Sherlock was upset, because his dungeon is just beginning to develop, and there are still few resources. If gamers are paid with magic stones, the young man risks becoming the first demon lord to go bankrupt immediately after opening the dungeon. Saber hastened to reassure his master. It is not necessary to pay gamers with magic stones. You can use gold coins. The main character had a lot of coins, but as far as he knew, the coins had a certain cost. 1,000 copper coins were equal to 1 silver coin. 1,000 silver coins were equal to 1 gold coin. Gold coins served as the common currency of the surface world. The thing is that in the underworld, they prefer to use magic stones. Magic stones could be found in nature, but they were very few. Also, these stones could be made from magical power extracted from the creatures on the surface. No one in the dungeon is interested in gold coins, and the main character was interested in whether those goblins from another world would want to get them. The assistant assured that gamers, on the contrary, really love gold coins. Saber suggested that gold coins should be made the common currency in the dungeon, and given to players as rewards for completing quests. In other words, goblins from another world simply need to be fooled. When the blacksmiths arrived at the place, it was a surprise for them that another new dungeon had appeared. Moreover, the master blacksmith, the Black Iron Dwarf, was surprised when he saw Sherlock. The young man looked young for a demon lord. The master blacksmith's name was Alex. He handed Sherlock a contract for 3 months, with a salary of 100 magic stones per month. The young ruler was only required to sign. Sherlock congratulated Alex on being the first worker of this great dungeon. Next, the young man showed the master blacksmith his workplace, and explained that he still had a little time left to prepare food for the goblins, because most likely they would come here hungry. Alex listened to everything and bowed politely, promising to fulfill everything. While Sherlock admired the start of work, Saber hastened to remind that there was little time left, and the server would soon need to be launched. The young master went inside the dungeon to quickly move on to the next stage. The main character approached the core and began concentrating his magical power. The energy has been concentrated. Now it is time to call. Sherlock called on everyone to come to faithfully serve the great demon lord. The young man expected that the process would be launched immediately, but nothing special had happened with his new servants yet. The main character wondered why no one from another world had appeared yet. Saber laughed and explained that gamers are now busy preparing all sorts of nonsense. They create a character, carefully thinking through his appearance, clothes, and accessories. They even choose their nail designs. Sherlock was very upset by this behavior of his new servants. He expected that everything would go much faster. Finally, the first player appeared. The first thing that surprised the goblin was how tall the NPC was, mistaking Sherlock for a non-player character. The difference in height was colossal. The player was amazed at how much science and technology had developed. Before this, the goblin was sure that online games in virtual reality were nonsense. But here, everything looked like the real thing. He could even feel his skin. The goblin pinched himself too hard, he even felt pain. He wondered if it was possible to somehow regulate all this. While the player was looking at everything, the main character solemnly addressed him, offering to swear allegiance to the great demon lord Sherlock. As gratitude, the goblin will receive the mercy and protection of the overlord. The goblin fell to his knees in front of the main character and said that Cool Lloyd swears allegiance to the great demon lord Sherlock. Cool. Lloyd looked at the young demon with interest, admitting that this NPC was too strong. The goblin could not refuse him. The player thought it was cool and would definitely need to talk about it on the forum. Observing the player's behavior, Sherlock was surprised that the goblin called himself that. Gradually, new gamers began to arrive in the dungeon. The new arrivals were surprised at the number of people present there. Gamers were interested in various questions, where they can get a reward for beginners or whether it is possible to use horizontal K-emoji emoticons in this game. More experienced players explained to beginners that this game does not use a keyboard and mouse. Everything is controlled using impulses from the nervous system. One of the gamers boasted about how flexible his language is. Other games lack this ability. In general, the goblins were interested in what they should do next, and whether there was training for beginners here. And also, are there initial quests here, or will you have to figure it out yourself? One of the goblins noted with admiration that the dungeon master, Sherlock, was a very handsome NPC model. In the end, the young demon got tired of watching all this fuss, and he loudly announced to his minions that he was now their noble master, the demon lord Sherlock. From that day on, they officially became residents of the Eternal Realm dungeon. Sherlock explained to the goblins that their mission was to turn the Eternal Kingdom into the greatest dungeon of all time, and now they have to receive tasks to begin construction of the dungeon. Gamers reacted to the Overlord's words with wild delight. So, the quests have been successfully received. It's time to start building the dungeon. The goblins' task was to get 100 diamonds. This task surprised some gamers. They did not expect that the newcomer's mission would be mining. The reward for completing the task was 10 copper coins. The main question was where to look for these diamonds. Although one of the goblins was indignant at why he had to carry heavy loads, since he had already delivered 100 diamonds to the forge. He wanted to extract minerals, not transport them. Ore can be smelted into metal, and this way you can make not only pickaxes, but also weapons. Sherlock was of the opinion that a first-class dungeon could not do without armed forces. Still, the unexplored areas of his domain are full of dangers. All kinds of underground creatures roam here, and even high-level monsters appear. So the ruler must arm his servants well and organize a dungeon defense system. Sherlock's thoughts were interrupted by Cool Lloyd running up to him. The goblin stated that he wanted the initial reward. Seeing the misunderstanding of the ruler, the goblin asked a clarifying question. Is this reward not given to NPCs? Following Cool Lloyd, other gamers ran up to Sherlock. Cruel Brother asked the Demon Lord for a higher ore mining rate. Hearing this, the other goblins began to ask for the same for themselves. The main character was slightly disappointed. Are they really not afraid of such a high-ranking demon? Sherlock suddenly wondered if goblins had always been so brave. But judging by their behavior, they simply are not afraid of death. One of the goblins with the nickname Papa is Proud of Me has already boasted to the Overlord that he had completed his task. Whatever one may say, Sherlock had to admit, even if these goblins behave strangely, they still work well. For Papa Proud of Me, receiving 3 gold coins was happiness. Their enthusiasm and efficiency surprised the Demon Lord. In any case, he does not need to spend money. Of course, there are disadvantages, but they are minor. Saber reported to Sherlock that they had successfully begun testing. Now they need to improve the game content and site interface. For example, add a dungeon map, an illustrated guide to monsters, and open new areas. The Demon Lord did not quite understand why this was and what was new about it. The assistant explained that the goblins from another world thought that the dungeon was a game. For them, doing hard work here is a way to have fun, so to maintain their interest, you need to add new mechanics. Sherlock wondered if he really needed to give these goblins more places to play. But the problem is that the Overlord did not yet have magical places to build the arena. Saber immediately objected that all this was not necessary, because gamers prefer other entertainment, more dangerous. Players don't like to spend all their time doing hard work. They want to explore the world and look for adventures. The tougher the battle with the monster, the happier they are. And even death will not stop their thirst for adrenaline. Saber continued to amaze Sherlock with stories about goblin gamers. They especially love discovering new locations. If they encounter a strong opponent, they will unite to challenge him. It doesn't matter what injuries the player receives, the main thing is to defeat the enemy. And of course, after defeating a strong enemy, the Overlord must give him a generous reward, preferably equipment. From everything that was told, Sherlock concluded that he needed to open a new location in which monsters would appear steadily and where he could get treasures. It is best to make a high-level monster the main boss. This location can become a source of dangerous adventures for gamers. Saber had no doubt that for his master this would be a simple matter. Sherlock was sure that this was a reasonable decision, and at the same time he would get to know these places himself. The master also warned the servant that upon his return, he intended to discuss the monster guide and map with him. The main character was glad that now he would save even more. First of all, Sherlock visited the spider's nest. He was confident that he had found the right place to entertain gamers. The spider's nest was a stable source of monsters. The monsters were huge and ferocious, so gamers will have something to do in their free time. One spider queen was needed. She would be able to produce hundreds of spiders. These monsters love to dig holes, and all their nests look like an underground labyrinth. Overall, the place was great. Angry players can fight spiders. While Sherlock was inspecting the place, huge spider monsters were crawling near him, but they did not dare to attack, feeling the superiority of the Demon Lord. At this moment, Saber appeared and reported that one of the players had died. Sherlock wondered if it happened from outside. The assistant said that the gamer committed suicide by crashing into a wall. The Lord suggested that perhaps his tasks were too difficult. But the assistant was sure of something else. The gamer just wanted to know what would happen if he were reborn in this world. He wanted to familiarize himself with all the mechanics of the game. So returning to the beginning is normal practice. Cool Lloyd was lying in the middle of the hall. Noticing the owner, the goblins immediately ran up to him. They were flattered by the master's attention. Gamers will be delighted that interaction with NPCs in this game is so well designed. Sherlock was sincerely sorry for the goblin. If the master wants to resurrect his servant, then he will have to go to the afterlife and ransom his soul. Summoning a new goblin would be more convenient. Saber, understanding his master's train of thought, tried to calm him down. In fact, the goblin's soul had not yet entered the afterlife. It was still here in the core. The main character knew for sure that since the goblin came from another world, his soul must go to the underworld. The main question was why exactly Saber took his soul. Saber explained that he used some tricks when he called them here. Therefore, in this world, their souls do not go to the afterlife. Thus, they need to restore their affairs and regain their consciousness in order to return to life. If the body is completely destroyed, then he needs to make a new body and instill consciousness into it. In another world, this operation is called character recreation. Sherlock did not immediately understand what his servant was talking about. He opened the book to clarify whether this was a new function of the dungeon core. He had not seen such a thing in the instructions. In response, the servant only laughed. This was his unique function, which combined technology and magic. The main character approached the motionless Cool Lloyd, directing a stream of his demonic energy at him, and a miracle happened. Cool Lloyd returned to life. The goblins were delighted with the demonic magic, but they were surprised by something else. Whether the master himself should control the resurrection mechanism. It must have something to do with the degree of damage to the body. The master first restored the gamer's body, and then brought him back to life. One of the gamers, with the nickname "Don't Worry About This Guy," said that he also wants to try this. No sooner said than done. A goblin named "Don't Worry About This Guy" fell in battle. The system warned players that this was a dangerous action and that they should not try to repeat it. Cool Lloyd rejoiced at his resurrection, muttering something about money. Another goblin decided to try how it is to die and be resurrected. Such antics greatly angered the ruler. Suicide in the dungeon is now prohibited. Sherlock ordered everyone back to work, threatening that if they didn't complete their tasks today, their reward would be halved. Having finished dealing with the goblins, the main character returned to his office and made an illustrated reference book of monsters and a new location, thinking that this would be enough for now. Now all that was left was to create an ad. The announcement looked like this: Dungeon Eternal Kingdom. The initial test was completed successfully. Tomorrow a new location starts: the Lair of Spiders. Sherlock thanked everyone for their support and also gave a detailed description of the new location. In addition to the description of simple spiders, there was a description of the killer flower, from which you can get the skin and pulp of the flower. The flower looks like a plant, but in reality, it is an animal that attacks any creature passing by. The boss. Queen of Spiders was also indicated. Paws, meat, hair, cobwebs, and spider eggs could be taken from her as a trophy. The queen is protected by many spiders and does not tolerate intrusion into her territory. The description stated that the hair of the Spider Queen is a valuable magical material for Sherlock, and if the player manages to get this hair, in return, he will receive the favor of the Demon Lord and increase his reputation. Also, most of the loot can be exchanged for currency in the main hall of the dungeon, and yet the main character had a question. Although he is really interested in the hair of the Spider Queen, why do the goblins gain his favor and increase his reputation? Or is it just another trick for gamers? Saber explained that players from the other world place a lot of emphasis on self-esteem, which is what sets them apart from other dungeon dwellers. The Demon Lord was amused by this comparison. Goblins have honor and dignity on a par with knights. The assistant said that the master's favor and reputation is a great way to show everyone else the importance of his existence, and it is also a kind of expression of their love and respect for their master. Looking through the notifications, the main character noticed that, in addition to everything else, gamers also like to leave reviews. Sherlock wondered what players from another world thought about him. Saber had the feeling that bad things were being said about him. And then, an announcement caught the eye of the ruler. The game tester revealed the complete strategy for passing the game Dungeon Eternal Kingdom. Sherlock began to read the goblin's review. The gamer stated that he was one of the first participants in the test group of players of the game Dungeon Eternal Kingdom. His name is Stephen Murdoch. The guy admitted that at first he thought that the slogan, "the world's first online game using military and VR technologies," was a common enticing trick. But Stephen soon realized that he was wrong. According to the gamer, the game engine there was very cool and the gamer felt like a real goblin. In the game, it was possible to adjust the pain parameter, because according to the standard, it is set to 0. Real hardcore guys can set the pain level to 100%. The next step was to describe the spawn location. Although the dungeon is called the Eternal Kingdom, you can only choose the goblin race. The gamer said that there are only 2 NPCs in the game now. One of them is Blacksmith Alex. Blacksmith Alex is a dark iron dwarf, so it is advisable not to touch anything in his shop. The offender risked getting hit in the face. Steven also mentioned that there is a famine in the game, so you need to use currency to buy food from the blacksmith store. At that time, the blacksmith store is the only place where you can spend currency to buy everything you need. The gamer said that currency can be obtained for completing quests from the Overlord. Most tasks are rewarded with copper coins. Steven next described the second NPC, the demonic dungeon lord Sherlock. The flying creature next to the Overlord is blue, a feature of this game. It is not yet clear whether this is an NPC or not, but the creature gives many tasks. According to the gamer, the game is still in beta version, so only stable NPCs can interact with players. But given the heavy use of VR in this game, the long development is not at all surprising. Steven also pointed out that this game does not have blood, blue bars, attributes, or other interface elements. Only purebred American characters can even have a name. Steven named his character Ronald Dursley. The gamer was unsure whether the name would be visible during the battle. And yet tomorrow, his plans were to open the wasteland as soon as a new area opened, but the guy promised to tell about this later. The tester also said that there are no specialties in the game. Even if you just dig all day, nothing will change. While it is unknown whether gold will become a major currency in the future, it most likely will. The gamer was sure that only when a character has no growth limit can he truly develop. Perhaps his goblin will become a battle mage. Steven also mentioned the game's intelligence, which selects tasks according to the character's progress. For example, if there is a need for ore, the system will take priority on mining tasks and open other tasks only after completing the previous ones. Players don't have to worry that there won't be anything to do. Steven admitted that he just signed up today and carried the bricks for 10 hours. There was something else in the game that the tester thought was interesting. When a player moves an item in the game, its position changes and does not return to its original position after time has elapsed. Carrying bricks all day can change the environment in the game. Everything was created so as not to violate the rules of the head of the city. Perhaps this is due to the fact that goblins are a low-level race, and they are afraid of everyone who is higher level. The tester also considered it necessary to mention penalties for death in this game. The pain in this game is real, so the gamer did not advise hitting the wall or killing yourself as he did. This is very painful. After death, players will be thrown back to the initial screen and can only be resurrected after the body is restored. Steven didn't recommend trying anything extreme here. The guy who jumped on the stove got burned. The tester himself just returned after restoring his account. And one more important point, skill tests cannot be translated, and only one game is issued per person. Therefore, those who say that they have several accounts are scammers. Given the current state of intelligence, the penalties for dying in the game are equivalent to actual death. So when the player performs difficult tasks, he must monitor his health. Matthew Firmer can revive a player, but the revival number must be saved. No matter what happens around, the player must take care of his life. Reading this entire review, Sherlock was most surprised at how goblins could like to work without a salary. This is not life. Overall, Steven's review seemed strange to the Overlord, and he was interested to see what other players were saying. In other reviews, players said different things. The girls thought Sherlock was handsome and wanted such a husband. Players also admired the realistic graphics. There were also those who could not pass the test. The main character was once again convinced that the players are very strange. Having finished reading the reviews, Sherlock decided to move on to other matters. In the hole, along with the goblins, the blacksmith Alex was sleeping right on the floor, and the main character began to wake him up. Woke up, Alex did not immediately understand who was standing in front of him and grabbed his hammer. Having finally woken up, the blacksmith asked Sherlock how he could be useful this time. The Lord said that now the goblin's task would be to clear out the spider's lair, and the demon was interested in what could be made from the available materials. The first thing Alex thought about was that the spider's lair was the master's new suicide mission. But Sherlock immediately objected. The main character explained that these goblins are different from ordinary ones, and based on the information he has, they really want to do this. Alex agreed that goblins are diligent and try very hard, but it is worth recognizing that some of them behave extremely incomprehensibly. The blacksmith in the dungeon can extract metals from large diamonds to create weapons and equipment. Alex informed the master that thanks to the goblins, the supply of diamonds allows him to create hundreds of ordinary equipment. Noticing that Sherlock was thinking about something, the blacksmith suggested that the owner was planning to create a top dungeon, because an ordinary lord would not hire so many goblins, and perhaps he was thinking about hiring an additional blacksmith. Alex offered to hire his younger brother, who is also very good at his craft. But the overlord didn't think about it yet. At the moment, he needed ordinary equipment. Sherlock mentally grinned at where he would get the money to hire staff. Alex handed the owner a scroll with a request to take a look. It turns out that recently the goblins asked him to get equipment, and even wrote a list of demands. The master looked at the list and immediately said to reject it. At the same time, the demon clarified that there is no need to worry about the equipment. He will give everything away. You just need to set a price for sale. The blacksmith, in turn, was surprised that the equipment was not delivered directly. Sherlock also revealed that the dungeon uses coins as rewards for tasks, and someday, there will come a time when these coins will run out. In this regard, the overlord needs someone who will restore these coins. Alex had already guessed that the owner had grandiose plans. Taking this opportunity, the blacksmith decided to demonstrate to the lord the blade he had just finished working on. The blade had no hilt. Sherlock understood that this way the damage of the blade would be lower. But since they are at the initial stage, the goblins can handle this. At this point, Saber decided to intervene in the conversation, advising my lord to give explanations to the players so that they could get used to it faster. Moreover, the servant had long ago written explanations for the equipment, and now asked the owner to take a look. The virtual screen indicated that it was a white, tubular blade forged by the blacksmith Alex, and that it was a standard weapon crafted from primordial diamond. Sherlock was pleased with Blue's work, but he was also interested in whether there was some kind of reward system for the level of prestige. Blue explained that the higher a player's prestige level, the better their equipment and status would be among other goblins. And if the player has a very low prestige level, he will only be able to use the worst equipment and be with the worst goblins. Sherlock liked Saber's explanation and approved everything, being sure that the goblins would also like it. Coming out to the goblins, the lord greeted them. The goblins immediately paid attention to the new weapons and equipment that Alex was forging. Gamers asked if they could try their hand at blacksmithing and where they could learn it. Sherlock immediately provided them with a quote. It was dark technology, but the server updated everything without delay. The overlord invited everyone to come closer and familiarize themselves with the new mission, which will allow them to move forward and add additional reputation. The goblins were delighted with the new updates. They were eager to open the wasteland. Meanwhile, the ruler solemnly announced to the goblins that their ruler had a new task. The mission was to clear the spider lair for the glory of the infinite kingdom. The goblins swore allegiance to the demon lord, and promised to serve for the glory of the endless kingdom. Some goblins still suspected something. How can you fight monsters without equipment? In addition, there is no golden entrance. They suggested that perhaps Matthew Firmer had his own plans for this. A little later, Alex announced that the blacksmith's store had been updated, and now for just 600 copper coins, goblins could purchase a freshly forged long sword and armor. A total of 5 swords were forged per server. Judging by the progress of yesterday's brick transfer, the goblins generally have no more than 100 copper coins in their hands. If they need equipment, they need to work harder. For Sherlock, this will not only increase the progress of the dungeon building, but will also give Alex time to craft 100 sets of equipment. There is no other way. To get out of the situation, the goblins organized auctions among themselves. One of the gamers sold his copper coins for $10, immediately warning that he would only accept $. A blue-green modifier transaction was also offered, which immediately finds his mobile number and adds him as a friend. Another gamer offered 523 copper coins, each worth by... Sherlock was perplexed by what he saw. The goblins used the currency of another world to exchange for useless copper coins. For them, goblins, it is important to be one step ahead of the rest. Saber recalled that he warned earlier. Goblins in other worlds are cryptocurrency veins, and if not for problems with recharging, Sherlock's kingdom could become the richest dungeon. The lord watched in amazement as one by one his goblins armed themselves. It seemed to Blue that the master wanted to go with his goblins, but the master immediately rejected his servant's assumption, because in such a case, the gamers might not meet the earthen spider. Sherlock explained that he has a more reliable way of monitoring gamers. At the same time, the master's finger pointed at Blue. Meanwhile, the goblins entered the spider's lair. The demon lord observed their actions, trying to instill in them to demonstrate all their might for the glory of the eternal kingdom. Ronald Dursley and the Sakura Palace cat demon were among the first to enter the lair. The goblin girl clarified whether the monster could really suddenly appear and stop them. To which Dursley replied that everything is possible, so you need to be careful. Suddenly a huge spider appeared, but it didn't seem to frighten the goblins at all. Goblin Arthur waited for the moment when the spider crawled closer to him. When the monster came close enough, Arthur plunged his sword straight into the spider's head. This action was not enough. With a powerful swing of its paws, the spider threw Arthur several meters forward. The goblin landed right next to the cat demon. The girl quickly ran up to Arthur to find out if he was okay. The gamer was fine, complaining of pain, which fortunately was not 100%. The guide says that underground spiders live in flocks. Arthur was worried that the escaped spider would kill people. Ronald Dursley agreed with Arthur. The goblin stood proudly with a sword in his hand, waiting for the monster to appear. It didn't take long for the monsters to appear, appearing in a whole flock at once. There were only 5 goblins, and they froze in place in confusion, realizing that it was too late to escape. The spiders did not kill their prey, but made cocoons out of them. One way or another, the gamers lost this battle. The Lord was a little upset, but after all, this is their first time here, so it's already a good result. Suddenly, a glow flashed in the dungeon hall, in which there were the silhouette of a goblin. Ronald appeared from the glow. His brothers rushed to him with questions. Is it difficult to fight? How did he die, and whether the body remained, whether he killed monsters, and whether he managed to study anything? At this moment, the glow appeared again. Inside it were the silhouettes of several more goblins. As far as the goblins understood, Ronald was crushed. Gamers bombarded their friend with questions about how difficult it was there, and whether this was the first combat zone. Gamers were also interested in what happened to the inventory of someone who died in battle, whether it ended up in a spider hole and whether it was possible to return for it. Ronald admired how realistic the monsters in this game were. The huge spider hit him twice. The gamer even managed to make out the monster's fangs. It was an unforgettable experience. Influenced by their friend's story, gamers came to the conclusion that they urgently needed to get to work, so that later they could buy equipment for themselves and create a squad to clear out the spider's lair. Sherlock watched with pleasure the behavior of his servants. Although the first expedition failed, the main thing is that the players liked the sight. Saber was also glad that his plan was working. The goblins will have to try several times, the equipment will break, and they will have to return to the bricks again. Everything went as planned. The Lord praised his blue, because thanks to him, goblins can often be revived without having to go to the underworld to be summoned from there. Saber, in turn, thanked him for the honor of serving the demon lord. Sherlock decided to go to the spider's lair and see what was happening there. He asked Saber to look after the dungeon. The Lord was pleased that the dungeon had just opened, and there was already loot. A little further away, Sherlock saw another loot. There were vibrations of demonic power inside the spider. Perhaps there was a magical item inside. The demon lord decided to take it anyway, especially if it was valuable. Then it will be possible to earn money for Alex's salary. While Sherlock was examining the lair, a monster appeared next to him, quite frightening the goblins. Gamers assumed that this was an underground spider. He seemed so scary to the players that their knees gave way. Gamers understood that these were black technologies, which is why the monsters were so realistic. Ronald noticed that the spider had a wound on its head similar to the one Arthur left. So, it's the same spider that hit him. Sherlock realized that the goblins had called Alex and cut down this underground spider. Gamers guessed that this was a hidden quest. According to the rules of the game, the first monster killed should give a special reward. At that moment, something caught the attention of Alex and Ronald. Sherlock asked the blacksmith to open the spider's shell to get the value, but he had not yet succeeded. The Lord brought 2 more assistants to help, so that Alex would not accidentally break the relic located in the monster's stomach. The gamers standing nearby were happy that they could watch it for free. When the autopsy of the spider was completed, Alex invited the goblins to climb inside and take a good look at everything. The goblins obeyed, and Arthur was the first to discover the find. It was a large, bluish ball. The Lord immediately scanned the relic. His guesses turned out to be correct. This item can definitely be sold for a couple of magic stones. Sherlock ordered the goblins to gather. They are heading to Winterfell. Other goblins looked after the lucky ones, jealous that they were lucky enough to receive so many quests. One of the gamers suggested that these were the privileges of donors, but he was immediately objected to. There is no such system here, and even if you want to, you won't be able to donate here. The Lord took out a golden scroll and ordered the goblins to get closer. An energy vortex arose around Sherlock and the gamers. The goblins were delighted with the magical power of the ruler. One of them confirmed that it was from a skill book. He personally saw Sherlock take out the scroll to tear it. And again, gamers were interested in whether it was possible to purchase such power for a donation. The whirlwind became stronger and brighter. Arriving at the place, the lucky ones were delighted with their journey. The first thing they decided was that they would need to take more photographs. This will definitely be in all the headlines. Upon arrival, gamers were immediately asked to fill out a form, because people behind them were also waiting for teleportation. Sherlock decided all the formalities personally, and ordered not to stay in one place. The city lived an ordinary life. There was trade in various magical items and abilities. Arthur immediately thought about his blog, feeling a good profit. Finally, the ruler announced that they had arrived at their final destination. Sherlock stopped in front of a wooden door with a round arch. Light was visible from the small window. Behind the door was a trading floor. The goblins noticed that there were gaming props everywhere on the tables. They were wondering how much it all cost. The seller looked very friendly. He advertised a magic wand from the surface that people had fought for in many wars. But they were fighting for a replica, and he had the original product. Seeing the overlord, the seller continued to advertise his goods at affordable prices. As a bonus, the merchant offered a sorcerer, emphasizing that this was a pretty fair deal. At this point, Arthur could no longer stand it. He asked the seller where he could donate. The gamer just couldn't wait to spend money to blow off some steam. The merchant remarked to Sherlock that his servants had lost their minds. But the lord was unperturbed. He reminded the seller that he had come here to estimate the cost of a magical item. The demon put a magic ball on the table, waiting for an assessment. While the merchant was appraising the magic item, the gamers continued to argue. Arthur was still interested in where he could donate. But Ronald reminded his comrade that they were now on a mission, and they should not eavesdrop on the NPC's chatter. The merchant checked something in the book, then touched the ball with his tongue, assessing it in all respects. Sherlock was amused by such manipulations of the seller. Needless to say, this ball was in the insides of a spider. Finally, the merchant determined that this ball was nothing more than the key to the ancient ruins. Ronald looked at the magic ball in admiration. He couldn't believe it was a key. It's more like the start of a quest. The gamer did not expect that they would activate both quests. Finally, the merchant announced his decision. Even though it was a key, he offered no more than 5,000 stones for it. Sherlock wasn't happy with that. 5,000 is the regular price, and is not profitable for him. The lord headed for the exit, but the merchant did not want to let go of such an interesting relic. The sly man understood that the demon was going to look for the right place himself. The seller wanted to buy the ball now for 6,000 stones, and in addition, offered some other friendly gift. In addition, the merchant offered to determine the location of the ruins and go on a mission together. Sherlock thought about it. The offer seemed interesting to him, although it all depends on the gift. He set a condition for the merchant. If the gift turns out to be an ordinary item, then the cost of the ball will be 10,000 stones and exclusive rights to study. The merchant agreed and went to get the item. The gift turned out to be quite unexpected. The bonus was the fairy from the Tree of Life. The seller stated that she knew alchemy, herbalism, and could prepare high-level potions from simple ingredients. The disadvantage was that the fairy was quite stubborn and had never spoken since she came to the merchant. And recently the girl stopped eating in order to starve herself. Sherlock was forced to admit that the fairy's skills were useful and hinted at the continuation of subsequent cooperation. The deal took place. The money was transferred to the master's account. My lord was glad that he had finally earned Alex's salary. Moreover, they did not expect that such a treasure could be found in this store. The lord ordered the goblins to wait for him at the door while he bought the herbs. Arthur was eager to find out how the task would end. Sherlock went straight to a florist shop called the Secret Garden. Inside the store there was a whole greenhouse of strange plants. In general, the atmosphere there was friendly and quite cozy. In the store, the lord was met by a smiling demon merchant. He said that today, they have a lot of new supplies that you can enjoy while drinking tea. Sherlock said that he plans to build a flower garden in the dungeon. He would also like to buy herbs. The demon explained that good flowers require good soil, otherwise they will not bloom. Considering the endless hellish soil, efforts will be divided in half. The lord did not see any problems in this. The only thing was that he needed seeds suitable for fairies, since the fairy would do all this. The merchant appreciated the foresight of his client, because some seeds are capable of being eaten by fairies. The cost of the flower garden, according to preliminary estimates, was 100,000 magic stones. Sherlock agreed with the proposal, saying that money is not a problem for him. He has enough of it. The demon was glad at such a wise decision of the client. He thanked the Lord for choosing this store and, as a token of gratitude, promised a pair of stone golems to help with the flower garden. My lord returned to his goblins already in the company of golems. Having seen the new characters, Arthur again asked if it was possible to donate for a new feature. Ronald was glad of the trip, it was worth it, and besides, it all promised a huge income. They returned back to the dungeon the same way, through the energy vortex. Other goblins immediately noticed the appearance of some new creatures, mistaking them for gods. Gamers guessed that all this was in order to improve the environment. The fairy brought by Sherlock was very weak. Moreover, there were no amenities for her in the dungeon. Gamers finally took a closer look at the guests, realizing that they were just golems. The fairy was getting worse, and Arthur, in despair, called the Lord for help, saying that the fairy had lost consciousness. The goblins surrounded the cage, looking at the forest creature with surprise. They were interested in whether they could then choose this race for themselves. One of the gamers suggested that most likely such a choice is impossible. Rudolph Reeds told him that they were a surface race, so that choice would not be available to them. Another goblin said that if rumors were to be believed, this fairy would teach them various skills. The fairy slowly came to her senses. She heard voices but could not open her eyes yet. One of the gamers continued to explain that the fairy would teach them the skills of growing plants. So Sherlock hired them to build wells and greenhouses, and also told them to take care of the fairy. Gamers were worried about how they would take care of the fairy if they didn't even know what she ate. Another goblin said that according to Sherlock, the fairy eats flowers. So many have already been sent to collect flowers. The goblins hoped that she would not die of hunger, otherwise they would fail the task. The fairy had already finally come to her senses at that moment. As soon as she opened her eyes, she thought that she had gone to heaven. But then she realized that she was in a den of monsters. The goblins screamed with joy. The fairy woke up. We urgently need to inform Sherlock. Goblins offered water to the fairy. Others offered her freshly picked flowers. And they were also interested in whether she had tasks for them. Someone even offered her money to teach her alchemy. But the fairy was sad. She just looked around, not wanting to eat or drink. Gamers were fussing around, waiting for the task to be updated. There was no effect yet. Sherlock was already nearby, and gamers were waiting for the fun to begin. The Lord stood in front of the cage with the fairy. The forest creature was frightened and demanded not to approach her. Sherlock said his name, explaining to the fairy that he is the mayor of the underground city of the Infinite Kingdom. Besides, he is her new master. My lord asked if the girl wanted to go home. The Lord realized that the fairy did not trust him yet, so he decided to get straight to the point. He told the fairy that if she helped him earn 50,000 magic stones using her skills, then in return he would give her freedom. The fairy was adamant, warning that she would never help the demon. She accused Sherlock of taking the souls of people who do business with him. The girl promised never to help him, even if she had to starve herself to do so. The ruler did not persuade the fairy. He turned around and headed for the exit, finally saying to let him know when he changed his mind. Gamers had no idea what to do now. If Sherlock can't persuade the fairy, then they won't be able to grow herbs. Perhaps it all depends on themselves. Saber was interested in the question of why his master did not continue to persuade the fairy, but simply decided to torture her until she agreed. The Lord explained to Blue that his idea of demons is a misconception that was outdated 100 years ago. Modern demons no longer torture people for fun. They play with their hearts. The assistant understood the point and promised to continue to take care of the fairy. Watching the work of the golems, Sherlock noticed quite good progress. Alex needs to make more tools, and the goblins, in turn, need to build several granite buildings. Saber informed the Lord that wood was required for tools. If you cut down trees on the surface for this, they will attract unwanted attention from the human kingdom. Their dungeon lacks an army, and if adventurers come, the inhabitants of the dungeon will have problems. Sherlock understood that his servant was right, so he asked him to look for some underground forests. In addition, you can make tools without handles. Of course, the players will be tired, but money will be saved. Blue grinned, Overlord in his usual spirit. Sherlock ordered Blue to go home, and in the meantime he would see what the Sky people were discussing on the forum. The Lord sat down at his computer and opened the website he needed. The very first announcement said that a new hidden location, Winterfell, would most likely open soon in the Infinite Kingdom dungeon. An image of Stephen Murdoch appeared on the screen, calling himself a beta tester of the game. Stephen said that today he, Arthur, Burning Chesthair, Sylvanas, and the Sakura Palace Cat Demon, the 5 of them, were going through a new map. Not even 10 minutes had passed before they were defeated. Murdoch admitted that they did not die in vain, because Arthur managed to kill the spider, and the magic item they obtained from the monster gave them 2 special quests. The gamers said that as part of the quest, they found themselves in a new area. Today's topic of his blog is Winterfell. The city is incredibly luxurious, and even the NPCs are unique and interesting. Stephen said that each NPC has his own will, and he cannot even imagine how it is all programmed. Murdoch suggested that the city is actually like their dungeon. Everything is interactive and interesting. The gamer was sure that all this was because he was with the mayor and could not explore the territory. But he managed to take a lot of screenshots, which he intended to show everyone. Looking at all this, Sherlock stated that this goblin is quite picky. Blue explained that this is the main function of players, because they love to share their gaming experiences. Meanwhile, the blogger said that the game mechanics are very complex. When the game becomes available to everyone, it will be like a second life, with the ability to use sword and magic. The gamer suggested that people take care of themselves. Yesterday he discussed the problem of the relevance of the elements, but after today's events, he finally understood why the authorities do not digitize this. All this is because in the game the factors are determined by the players. No matter how strong the goblins were as players, it all came down to one thing. If you want to become stronger, then you need to carry blocks and work with your hands. Stephen admitted that after 2 days of working in the game, he became noticeably stronger. The gamer further said that in addition to the blacksmith Alex, a new NPC appeared, a fairy responsible for growing herbs and alchemy. But now the fairy does not want to work in the dungeon. It seems that fairies and dungeon dwellers are not on the best terms. Perhaps this is another hidden quest that makes sense to do. Stephen also made a screenshot describing a blade without a hilt. The blade was listed as standard equipment in the Infinite Kingdom dungeon. The gamer explained that he could put on armor and weapons. Armor differs from one another. She has personalities and special traits, including attack power, defense, weight, and elements. A screenshot of the armor was also provided. It was listed as standard equipment in the Infinite Kingdom dungeon, forged with sophistication. All this was quite expensive. 2 items cost 600 copper coins. The gamer admitted that the rich are looking forward to the donation function being opened in the game. Stephen also said that a new feature was released today. Reputation. Now, in addition to money, it will be possible to acquire reputation for completing quests. Reputation will allow you to equip some armor, and the game has a level system. The full potential of using reputation will be revealed in the future. According to the blogger, now everyone is working hard to earn money for equipment. Players will soon be equipped to take on the spiders together. If only a few players go there, it will be impossible to pass through the caves. Sherlock wondered when the attack was planned. Blue didn't know for sure, but he guessed the goblins were moving out soon. Sherlock looked thoughtfully at his goblins. Their battle cry reached the Overlord. For the mayor. The goblins ran in a crowd towards the opened portal. It seems that they were not afraid of anything, rushing headlong into the unknown. The Lord could not believe his eyes. Was it really all the power of the players? Everything was very pretentious. It all seemed strange to Sherlock. He asked if Blue was sure that this was entertainment for strangers. Do they really like this kind of destruction? The assistant looked at things more simply, even if gamers don't like it. For them, it's just a game. For the ruler, the question arose, is there no war in their world? Their fights are kind of primitive. Saber did not deny that there were wars in the human world, but here in the game, they did not feel any danger. Ordinary people are not used to fighting. But at the same time, the assistant suggested that if gamers continue to be defeated here, they might get angry and leave the game. The ruler was not happy with this arrangement. Blue reiterated that if the goblins were no longer having fun, they could quit the game. The Lord admitted that he would be sorry to lose them, since he had just met them. Blue suggested a way out of the situation. Measures need to be taken to guarantee their labor. The ruler was ready to listen to the assistant's suggestions. Saber suggested giving the goblins the means to become stronger, and so that constant death would only motivate them to work more. Sherlock thought Blue's proposal was a great idea, because if the goblins left the game, He would not have enough materials for weapons. The Overlord asked Blue to calm the goblins after returning, and he himself was heading to Winterfell in search of a trainer. By the word calm, the assistant meant to reward them. This is exactly what he intended to do. Saber made an announcement. Warriors who took part in the development of lands will receive 10 copper coins. The money will be credited to your account within 12 hours. The announcement also indicated that skill trainers would soon be available so gamers could improve their skills. Upon arrival in Winterfell, the Lord immediately contacted the reception with a request to provide him with a combat skills trainer. The girl recognized Sherlock, complaining that she had not seen each other for a long time. She asked how much the ruler was willing to pay. The young man promised 20 magic stones for the coach. The young lady, smiling guiltily, indicated that the requirements were quite high. The problem was that for 20 magic stones, she would not be able to select the right candidate. Sherlock clarified that he does not need a warrior, but just a trainer for goblins. He explained that his dungeon was quite new, so he could only offer a salary of 20 stones. But the girl hastened to upset the Lord. They did not accept applications for work below 200 magic stones. The ruler decided to take an extreme step. He turned on all his charm, wondering if even their relationship could influence the young lady's decision. In response, the young lady indicated that this was only the second time they were seeing each other. Sherlock, in turn, recalled that when they first met, the succubus girl sold him a half-rotten dungeon. Therefore, his current request is completely justified. The young lady thought about it. The argument was indeed weighty. Finally, she made a decision. She will keep Sherlock in mind, and when she finds a suitable candidate, she will immediately send him to the master's dungeon. My lord thanked the succubus, indicating that he needed a trainer as soon as possible. Blue heard the whole conversation, and when they headed towards the exit, he said that looking at the girl, he suddenly had an idea. Ideas meant a proposal to find Sherlock an assistant in order to save time. The Lord indicated that in order to hire an assistant, you need money, because this is not a cheap pleasure. Blue explained that it was entirely possible to use part-time workers. Besides, that lady seemed friendly to Blue, and it was entirely possible that she would agree to this. Sherlock promised to think about it, asking his assistant to remind him about it later. As soon as the ruler returned to the dungeon, goblins immediately ran up to him. Players were interested in when they would be able to learn skills, whether there were any conditions for this, and whether they needed to choose skills. Another question was asked whether the first lesson is free, and then a fee will be charged. The Lord was slightly angry. He immediately asked Blue if he had told the goblins about the trainer. The assistant admitted that he had made the announcement, but the goblins misinterpreted it, thinking that Sherlock would personally teach them. Having realized what the point was, the Overlord told the goblins that he had hired a trainer to improve their fighting skills. Sherlock expressed the hope that his servants would become good soldiers. The goblins again asked how much it would cost and whether it was possible to donate. While Sherlock was communicating with his servants, a lonely computer made the sound of an incoming message. This was a request from the lobby. Meanwhile, the Lord said that it was time for an official announcement. In the midst of the meeting, something caught the Lord's attention. He looked around, straining his ears. Right next to Sherlock, his assistant was floating in the air, glowing red this time. The outline of an envelope of the same red color appeared in the air next to the assistant. The Lord finally noticed that someone had written to him. The letter was from the succubus girl, Evelyn. She reported that she had found a coach, in connection with which she asked to send her 5 magic stones as tax. Blue noticed that the young lady was very meticulous, and suggested that we still consider her candidacy for the position of assistant. A minute later, Saber reported that a request for teleportation had been received. Most likely it was a trainer from Evelyn. Sherlock ordered to accept the request from the guest. The goblins were very surprised when a teleport shining with a bluish light suddenly appeared in the middle of the hall. Gamers were curious who arrived there. Perhaps it was the coach. They decided to come closer and take a closer look. A leg appeared from the energy vortex. The guest turned out to be a troll. His head and arm were bandaged, as if he had taken part in a battle. The visitor was surprised by the number of goblins present in the dungeon, from which he concluded that the mayor was rich. He understood that hopes were placed on him. Ronald immediately recognized the guest. The gamer saw him at the gates of Winterfell as a guard. The goblins immediately began to express their assumptions on this matter. If the troll is an NPC from Winterfell, then Winterfell will soon become accessible. Perhaps this troll will have a quest that opens Winterfell. Sherlock came out to personally greet the new trainer. Seeing the Lord, the troll greeted him, dropping to one knee. The troll introduced himself as Captain Moros. He is an elite guard of Winterfell. who arrived to train the brave. The trainer stopped mid-sentence, surprised that he would have to train goblins. The goblins themselves were at a loss, still not believing that this was their trainer from the advertisement. In a moment, gamers were already eager to start learning the skills. The troll's face also seemed familiar to the Lord. He recognized him as the guard at the teleport in the lobby. Noticing the distrust in the eyes of the Overlord, the troll began to assure that he would certainly do his job and that he could be trusted. The troll said that in his youth he was a warrior of considerable strength until he got married. The troll became sad, immersed in bitter memories. Sherlock was not a supporter of such nostalgia and always tried to be cool. All he needed was to train his goblins to fight spiders, and if the trainer could do it, he would hire him. The Lord asked to confirm this publicly. The troll readily agreed. As a sign of his consent, the coach pressed the desired button. The agreement was officially registered. The new trainer was eager to prove his skills, and Sherlock ordered to follow him. The Lord explained that he had a rather unusual dungeon and could not spend much time training the goblins. Sherlock said that gamers will have 2 free hours of training a day. For the rest of the time, they will have to pay extra. Payment will have to be taken not in magic stones, but in gold. In addition to time to sleep, the trainer will have half an hour of rest after a 2-hour training session. Having brought the train up to date, the Overlord once again inquired whether the troll agreed to such conditions. Trenner was surprised why the ruler needed their useless currency. In addition, goblins do not make the best warriors. All they can do in battle is dodge and dodge. And one more thing bothered the troll. If you have to pay for training, doesn't that discourage the desire to train? Sherlock did not go into details, saying only that this is how the system of his underground city works, and the trainer himself will understand everything when he starts training with them. The Lord handed the coach a badge and ordered him to go to work, but not to forget that the first day is free. The troll promised to fulfill his duties honestly. Having collected everything at the training ground, the coach announced the start of training. The goblins listened carefully to every word of their new master, trying to concentrate as much as possible. Looking around the crowd, the coach decided that first he needed to choose someone as an example. The troll greeted his new students. The master's name was Moros, and from today he will be their new trainer. Moros warned that the goblins would have 2 hours of free training per day. You will have to pay extra for additional time. The gamers were delighted with the conditions he voiced. They agreed to this. Moros actually turned out to be a strict coach. In addition, the goblins themselves were interested in learning martial arts. Noticing one of the goblins in the yard, Sherlock asked Blue if not all players love to fight and why this player did not go to training. Blue suggested that most likely this player likes a quiet life and travel. He must be a pacifist. The Lord was surprised how one could travel while in a dungeon. At this moment, the Lord came up with an idea. Such players could learn herbalism from the fairy. Sherlock was glad that finally their dungeon was developing in the right direction. The Lord felt that he was now definitely approaching his goal. Moros looked appraisingly at the assembled students, trying to figure out where to start. Finally, the trainer announced that before the start of the training, he wanted to test the strength of his students. He asked who wanted to fight him first. The goblins, brave and confident until this moment, suddenly became confused, looking around at each other. Arthur was the first to break the silence. He was ready to fight the coach. Moving forward a little, Arthur once again repeated that he wanted to fight Moros. The coach looked carefully at the daredevil and invited him to come up to him. The rivals took a fighting stance, preparing to fight. A few minutes later, Arthur lay on the floor, defeated. Now gamers have realized that this NPC actually turned out to be very strong. However, other goblins also expressed a desire to fight him. Moros allowed several to attack him at once. But not even a minute had passed before they were all lying on the floor. Moros called them the worst students, unable to hit properly. The gamers began to apologize, citing the fact that they were just beginners and were training for the first time. Besides, they had never fought people before, only spiders. Moros already understood what the problem was. A training plan was forming in his head. The goblins, with tears in their eyes, told the master that they were torn to pieces every time they got to the spiders. They were reborn again, but the monsters pulled them away one by one. Moros was surprised. It turns out that the goblins were simply feeding the spiders. First of all, he decided to teach them basic techniques, as well as give them combat experience. For this purpose, the trainer was going to send them to the cave to catch a couple of spiders. A signal came from the lobby again. Moros left his students for now and came to the ruler to share his idea with him. The troll brought up the example that gladiators used live targets for training to increase strength and experience. Moros suggested catching a couple of spiders to make the training more effective. Sherlock did not object, but asked that security measures be taken. The trainer promised that he would not allow the servants to die in vain. But Sherlock meant something completely different, explaining to the troll that he must take care of himself first and ignore the goblins when danger arose. Moros was flattered. In his mind, he kept repeating that the master cared. The strange expression on the troll's face did not escape the Lord's attention. Armed with a chain, Moros went to the training ground, promising the overlord to be useful. The Lord finally said that he would wait for his return. At the training ground, the trainer explained to the goblins that they needed to catch a spider for training. Moros asked which player wanted to go with him. The troll was sure that the goblins would chicken out. But to his surprise, several gamers expressed a desire to go to the lair. The players were sure that this was a hidden quest, as a reward for hard training. Moros was pleasantly shocked to realize that he had underestimated his students. Are they really not afraid of death? In the end, the trainer decided to choose 10, the rest will go next time. The troll looked at the rejoicing gamers with bewilderment. Ronald, who was also among the chosen ones, warned the teacher that if there was danger, he had better run away. The system notification stated that Moros chose the gamers, pledging in turn to show them the way to catch the cave spider for training. Upon return, selected players will receive hiltless short swords and armor. And also, upon completion of the quest, the goblins will receive 100 copper coins. The important point was that if Moros dies before completing the quest, the task will be considered failed. The quest can be started again if Moros is alive. The goblins, together with the trainer, descended into the spider caves. Understanding the importance of these conditions of the quest, one of the players once again reminded that if danger arises, you must immediately run away with the coach, under no circumstances allowing him to die. They checked the den. There are no spiders. This situation did not fully suit Moros. He stated that if the goblins did not want to go, then let them return. Spiders can detect victims, and in this case the trainer will not be able to fight if gamers are confused around. Gamers drew their own conclusions. They admired that NPCs had their own character and impressive interactions with players. The players were slightly worried that the NPC might hear them and cancel the quest due to their chatter. The game seemed so realistic to them that they could expect anything. At that moment, Arthur heard a rustling sound, warning the others that someone was approaching. The goblins hid and began to wait for the monster to appear. It didn't take long for spiders to appear. They appeared from everywhere. Moros gave instructions to kill one spider and simply distract the rest. The coach stood in front and ordered everyone to move forward. Finally, 2 huge spiders appeared ahead. Moros stood in front, with Arthur and Ronald behind him in a fighting stance. The coach, regardless of the risk, rushed forward without fear. The troll deftly delivered a couple of blows to the monster's head, preventing him from getting closer. Raising his blade for the decisive blow, Moros said, looking into the monster's eyes, that it was a great honor to die from his sword. The spider was very close to the coach, and the students were very worried about his life. In the end, Ronald could not stand it and rushed to the coach to help. To protect Moros, the goblin decided to sacrifice his own life. He rushed straight into the monster's clutches. The teacher highly appreciated such dedication of the student. Taking advantage of the moment, the troll dealt a couple of blows to the spider. But be that as it may, the goblins came to the lair not to kill monsters, but to capture them. Moros ordered Arthur to distract the spider's attention, while he and the rest of the goblins surrounded him. The guys tried their best, trying to drive the monster into a trap, but the enemy was incredibly strong. Gamers encouraged each other, demonstrating their courage and dedication. Finally, the monster was defeated. The goblins did not hide their joyful emotions. For the first time, they themselves killed the monster. Observing Ronald's actions, the troll still did not understand why the goblin made a self-sacrifice. Because they had only known each other for 2 days. The goblin was pierced through by a spider's claw. But the guy was still alive. He did not give up. Moros has already guessed that Ronald is trying to cut off the spider's leg in order to escape. The guy's will to live was admirable. Looking at the goblin's futile efforts to get rid of the spider's limb stuck in his body, the teacher decided that such fighters should not die such a death. Moros approached Ronald and, calling him brother, put his sword on his shoulder. The troll admitted that he did not understand why the guy was protecting him, but promised that he would always remember him. The gamer was scared, not understanding what the teacher was up to. Moros said that he considered Ronald a brave warrior and wanted him to leave with dignity. The underworld must accept the goblin as a good friend. The teacher asked not to say anything in response, promising that everything would be fine. Finally, the goblin guessed what he was talking about, begging him to stop because he would still be useful. Ronald desperately called Arthur for help. He could not even move his leg. The gamer was shocked by this turn of events. He could not understand why this NPC wanted to kill him, because a serious injury in the game does not necessarily entail death. The comrades assumed that the coach decided that the player was in unbearable pain, so he decided to put him out of his suffering. Eventually, Arthur managed to cut off the spider's limb, freeing his friend's body. Watching the players, Moros didn't understand whether this guy really wasn't in pain at all. The goblins helped their comrade get up and they headed back, because Ronald still needed to feed his grandmother. The coach was shocked. What kind of willpower you need to have still hold on? Upon returning to a safe place, the heroes were immediately surrounded by the goblins who remained there. The players admired Ronald's speed and strength, because before they knew it, he had figured everything out on his own. The gamers were sure that it was thanks to Ronald that they did not fail the mission. Moros was furious because now was the best time to praise him. The teacher approached the crowd of goblins and coughed meaningfully, attracting attention. Moros ordered everyone to shut up and pick up the spider. They returned to the dungeon. The dungeon glowed with a dim bluish light and no longer seemed as dull as before. The coach was perplexed why the goblins looked at him with offense. An awkward silence reigned around him. The silence was broken by Arthur's scream. Ronald was already feeling very bad. Looking at the seriously wounded goblin, the teacher began to cry, saying that he would mourn for this brave warrior. Moros perceived the situation in a way that was familiar to him. In such cases, his relatives pray for the fallen and wish him a successful journey to the underworld. But gamers had a different opinion. Arthur asked the coach to be silent, because they had almost arrived in the dungeon. Ronald asked to hurry up. He was about to lose consciousness. The comrades who were waiting in the dungeon greeted the heroes with delighted shouts. They all witnessed an amazing story, and according to the rules of the game, points were awarded for this. In the dungeon, Arthur began to call for help from the Overlord to help him resurrect Ronald. They returned with the corpse. Moros tried to explain to the Lord what happened, but he didn't even listen. His attention was focused on Ronald lying on the floor. To resurrect the player, Sherlock, as usual, used his demonic magic. There was a huge hole in the goblin's body left by the spider's paw. He was still lying there without signs of life. A moment later, Ronald woke up, trying to remember what happened. In a matter of seconds, the goblin finally came to his senses. It seems that dying and coming back to life was becoming a common thing for him. Ronald jumped up sharply and reported to the master that he was at his disposal and ready to carry out tasks. Moros was shocked by what he saw. For him, seeing the resurrection was akin to a miracle. The streets of the dungeon were deserted. All the inhabitants were inside the building. All but two. Moros could not find words to express his admiration. Sherlock forestalled his thought, confirming that this was exactly what the troll was thinking. The Lord admitted that he can endlessly resurrect, no matter what state they are in. The Lord has his own special way of bringing them back. Sherlock is a noble demon, and he is truly a skilled craftsman. Moros did not hide his delight and admiration for the power of his master. The demon immediately warned the troll that, unfortunately, he did not meet the special requirements that goblins have, so such a resurrection would not work with him. The Lord once again emphasized that his dungeon is special, so they need warriors who can adapt to changes. And if Moros cannot accept this, then no one is keeping him here. The troll for a moment felt anger growing in him, but quickly pulled himself together, suppressing such emotions. Moros knelt down in front of his master and said that he was ready to give his soul and serve the kingdom until the end of his days. The troll reminded that after signing the contract, he will become the owner's closest servant. Terminating the contract voluntarily will be very problematic. Sherlock was amused by the troll's behavior. He is still playing at his age. In fact, the new generation of demons relies heavily on humans, recruiting them as subordinates. The Lord reassured Moros, explaining that there was no need to sign the contract, especially since the troll had a family to take care of. Sherlock promised that if Moros wants to stay and work with peace of mind, then there will be no problems. The Overlord will consider accepting the troll and his family once the situation in the dungeon improves. Noticing the confusion in the coach's eyes, Lord said that he saw great potential in him. The troll's eyes welled up from a feeling of gratitude. When leaving, Moros decided that he must prove his loyalty to the master in order to receive the same privileges as those goblins. Having secluded himself in the main hall of the underground city, Blue asked the gentleman why he was hiding the fact that these goblins were actually players from another world. Was it really all this solely to gain the loyalty of Moros? Sherlock explained that he simply preferred to keep his secret secret. As an example, the Lord asked Blue what would happen if other dungeon lords found out that he had such a virtual assistant. The assistant had no doubt that because of this, they could very well start a war in order to take the virtual assistant for themselves. Sherlock fully shared the servant's opinion, so they needed to quickly find a way to become stronger. The ruler was faced with the question of how many players from another world Saber could recruit. The assistant explained that 100 people called at present is the limit. If the gentleman wants to increase the number of recruits, then he will have to update Blue. In addition, if there is a need to increase the number of recruits, then it is necessary to make an announcement, called a vacancy in the human world. Blue explained that this way they would open up more areas and gameplay that would help attract new players. Sherlock was upset in advance that his wallet would be empty again. Ultimately, the Lord decided not to change anything for now. At the moment, there are enough old players, and we can return to this topic after the mine is finished. The Lord watched his goblins train. The guys tried very hard and showed great hope. Despite all the severity, Moros was a good coach, and the students themselves respect him. Overall, Sherlock was pleased. Work in the dungeon was in full swing. Gamers became stronger and more resilient every day. A little more, and they will be ready to fight the monsters. But in addition to close combat techniques, the goblins needed new equipment, and Ronald asked Alex if it was ready. The blacksmith was silent. In this regard, Ronald concluded that most likely this NPC has an automatic information filtering function. Alex continued to pretend that he did not hear anything, and the gamer suggested that he could have quarreled with the goblins. Finally, the man looked up from his work and said to wait a little while he finished and put everything up for sale. Ronald reminded them that they were actually in a hurry to open the wasteland. Running away from the angry Alex, the goblin shouted so that he would not forget to sharpen the blade properly. Swords should cut spiders like butter. Meanwhile, Sherlock remembered that Alex needed a card for new equipment. The Overlord asked Blue to take care of this. Soon, the blacksmith announced that the equipment was ready. It was a diamond shield, the most common standard shield in the Eternal Kingdom dungeon, forged from diamond chips. Ronald made an announcement that the wasteland was now open. You need to have full equipment, go through training 3 times, and those online can come and fight him. For his efforts and valor, Ronald was given the honor of becoming the head of the goblins. Everyone wanted to be on his team, bragging about their experience or offering a buff for good luck. Although the goblins trained hard, Sherlock was still worried whether they would be able to successfully complete the mission this time. It was important to him what Blue thought about this. The assistant reassured the Lord that the probability of success was now very high. Many of them are already experienced players, and the equipment this time is much better. Suddenly, the attention of Sherlock and his assistant was attracted by an enthusiastic exclamation. One of the goblins found something and called everyone to look. Gamers looked at the find with admiration. Everyone wanted to get it for themselves, assuming that it was gold. The stone glowed with a bright yellow light. The goblin who discovered the miracle stone said that he only hit it a couple of times before the pick broke. But the stone is worth it. Gamers assumed that this was a new game item. At this moment, Sherlock approached the players. The goblin who discovered the stone immediately boasted of his find to the master. The Lord found it difficult to carry out the assessment on his own, so he asked Alex to take care of it. Sherlock ordered the gamers to continue working and leave the rest to the blacksmith. The blacksmith tried to split the stone with extreme caution, trying not to hit it too hard with the pick. Finally, the analysis was carried out, and Alex made a verdict that in front of them was gold ore, and although it was not of very high quality, it would be suitable for magic props. The ruler was primarily interested in whether it could be sold. The blacksmith was glad that it was possible to sell, but everything would depend on quality and demand. If the quality is poor, then for a small piece you can get 1,000 magic stones. After this news, Sherlock wondered if Alex could create a pickaxe to mine this ore. The blacksmith said that he would send a request to the store. The Lord responded by asking the blacksmith to get him 10 handfuls of this ore, and at the same time find out whether they could cover his expenses. Alex promised to fulfill everything. He needed to check something else. At that moment, a noise was heard. Sherlock and the blacksmith froze in place, listening to what was happening there. A crowd of goblins, led by Ronald, ran forward screaming. They intended to stop someone. The players confidently headed towards the portal. Alex was very angry about this. He believed that stupid goblins thought only of themselves and did not take into account the feelings of others. And he was not an ordinary blacksmith. The blacksmith began to complain to the master that for the sake of developing the wasteland, the goblins had a fight with him and refused to dig ore at night, and it was very difficult for him himself. Sherlock explained to the blacksmith that goblins just want to achieve something, and there is no need to be angry with them. The remaining goblins tried to wake up the sleeping trainer. They also wanted to learn. Seeing that the troll did not react at all, gamers assumed that the dream was his way of deviating from the plan. In fact, the NPC was on Alex's side. Meanwhile, the master gave the order for Blue to go on a quest to build a dormitory with the goblins. The card indicated that the purpose of the mission was to build 2 dormitories. The reward was 100 copper coins. One of the goblins planned to get there after the construction of the dormitory for the NPCs was completed, and look at their weapons. Hearing this, the blacksmith threatened to feed him to rodents. The goblins, meanwhile, arrived at the spider's nest and hid at the entrance to the cave, waiting for the monster to appear. Finally, several pairs of glaring eyes lit up in the dark opening. Several spiders rushed towards their victims. Ronald, being experienced in this regard, waited for the monster to approach him. The guy was no longer afraid of anything. The head of the goblin detachment led his people, moving forward slightly. Luke Chester took the lead, but Ronald persistently warned him to be careful with the spider. Ronald taught that one must hit and retreat mercilessly. Luke fought fearlessly and even managed to land a couple of blows on the monster. Ronald supervised the squad that they needed to surround the spider, as Moros taught them. The time for the real hunt has come. Finally, with everyone's efforts, the goblins managed to kill the monster. The guys were delighted that they had succeeded. A little further, other goblins could not defeat the spider, and Ronald invited the guys to help them. The whole crowd of gamers attacked the monster, but it still did not give in. One of the goblins stood aside for a moment. Ronald, noticing this, asked if everything was okay with him. In fact, nothing happened to the guy. He was just worried that he would miss the monster. Ronald tried to calm his comrade as much as possible. They had already killed 3 spiders. So overall, they did pretty well. As the head of the detachment, Ronald gave the command to his comrades to finish this mission. The time has come to return. Let the master see what they have achieved. In addition, there was another trophy inside the monster. Balls. Watching from the window as the goblins returned to base with 3 killed spiders, Sherlock noted that the work of his people was worthy of all praise. Blue fully supported the owner. As you can see, Moros's training gives good results. At the same moment, the assistant's color changed from blue to red, which means that the owner received a message. Sherlock assumed that a letter had arrived from the forge. The letter was from a forge called Not the Most Expensive. They congratulated the Lord on the extraction of gold ore, and also reported that they had entrusted the underground caravan with delivering him 10 pickaxes with a total value of 500 magic stones. In addition, the caravan expects cooperation in the extraction of gold ore. Any questions should be addressed to the foreman. It seems that the presence of the caravan in this case was not to Sherlock's liking, and this did not escape the assistant's careful gaze. The Overlord was worried about one thing. Judging by the current performance of the players, they would probably want to cooperate with the caravan. The Lord imagined for a second how the goblins were trying to buy things for themselves. They will probably be at a loss as to why they can't buy something with copper coins and what a magic stone is. The Lord understood that it would be quite problematic to explain to them what was what. In terms of the caravan, Sherlock's biggest worry was that the goblins would say something strange and attract unwanted attention. Blue guessed that in this case, the secrets of their dungeon would be revealed. Understanding the true cause of the excitement, Saber decided to calm the master at least a little. After all, the appearance of a caravan in a dungeon can be regarded as a game event. The assistant came up with an idea. They could choose the material to exchange and let the goblins exchange with the caravan. This can be presented as a kind of reward for the event. Sherlock liked this idea. It could solve many problems. Blue believed that the main thing in this case was to discuss the price with the caravan and choose what materials the players could get. Such conditions will suit everyone. Be that as it may, the ruler decided that there was no need to rush, especially since the caravan had not yet arrived. Sherlock suggested that for now we go to the goblins, who returned with a reward. Having gone down to the guys, the Lord immediately began with an announcement. The Lord said that before they opened the wasteland, Alex said that spiders can improve equipment, and now the Lord is going to do just that. The goblins asked why they didn't have any equipment this time. Was it really an accident? Gamers complained that spider silk was very difficult to collect. This is probably because this is a very rare material. The price list indicated that 1 ball of spider silk was valued at 100 reputations plus 100 copper coins, while 1 spider leg and 10 kilograms of spider meat cost 10 copper coins. Silk could be used as a material to improve weapons. The Overlord tried to cheer up his subjects, convincing them that collecting materials was the only way to make them stronger. In addition, a resource processing system will soon open. The goblins tried their best, because that is what they are here for. Saber also praised the gamers, they really know their stuff. Sherlock was about to leave, but at that moment something happened that he did not expect. One of the players decided to start advertising spider legs. The entrepreneur turned out to be Ronald. He valued the spider legs at the initial cost of 10 copper coins apiece, and was now simply trying to sell his trophies to less fortunate players. His comrades decided to go even further. They held an auction, raising the price of the paw to 35 copper coins apiece. Ronald didn't expect his idea to work. At that moment, Arthur appeared with a bag of coins and said that he was taking everything. The rest of the players were terribly upset. The coin now costs at least $20, and they could not be equal to the rich Arthur. The guy simply deprived everyone of their chance, and gamers had no choice but to work even harder. Sherlock found the goblins consulting with each other. The guys needed coins. There were those who planned to play here on a permanent basis due to the fact that it was easier to make money here than at a regular job, although there was no guarantee that they would not get hurt during a fight with a spider. Anticipating the master's question, Saber explained that trade is a fairly popular option for exchanging resources. Watching the bustling players, Sherlock wondered if they knew the true purpose of these things. The Lord was going to process them into materials, attach them to equipment, and sell them at a higher price. Blue explained that Alex had previously let it slip that spider legs and silk could be used to make equipment, which is why gamers went crazy. Based on all this, the Overlord concluded that the goblins want to move on to making equipment, bypassing their master. Saber confirmed his guess, adding that along with the price, Sherlock can now regulate the currency. Demonstrating on the screen the stages of improving the blade, Blue suggested installing enhancements for equipment, which would speed up the player's consumption and currency. Sherlock thought strengthening the equipment would be cool. The assistant explained that after the upgrade, the equipment will improve each time. The only thing that is required is to install the materials that need to be consumed to strengthen it. Blue admitted that the probability of an upgrade is not 100%, but the higher the level, the higher the damage. If the enhancement fails, then you will have to buy new equipment. Saber suggested that equipment coupons could be purchased with copper coins. You can also increase the number of props, which will also increase the consumption of coins. The assistant summed up his plan. They will be able to simultaneously process currency and weapons and then use them to reforge basic equipment and sell them to players. The Overlord liked this prospect. Now Blue must go and convey this to Alex. In the blacksmith's yard, everything was still unchanged. Only Arthur was doing his calculations. At some point, something caught the guy's eye. Alex posted new advertisements. One said about improving equipment. The other was a notice about strengthening. The enhancement notice said that you need to use cobwebs and spider legs to strengthen and improve. Each element can be strengthened up to 5 times, but there was a high probability of equipment damage after 3 unsuccessful attempts. Arthur was delighted with the upcoming updates. He called everyone to come and check it out too. Unlike Arthur, his comrades did not feel the same delight. They perceived the upgrades as a problem that would make it impossible for ordinary dungeon dwellers to survive. The possibility of equipment damage after the 3rd attempt was a serious concern for them. Having announced the innovations, the blacksmith hurried to return to his business, but he felt that someone was catching up with him. Arthur stood behind Alex. The guy expressed a desire to strengthen his weapon, and the master invited the gamer to follow him. Other players noticed that Arthur was heading to the forge and decided to spy on what would happen there. The blacksmith picked up a blade without a hilt and carried out an initial inspection. Gamers looked at their weapons with hope, but their equipment was level 1, so the likelihood of strengthening was quite low. Alex threw the blades into a vat of transparent liquid, and at that moment, some kind of magic began to happen. The goblins were delighted with the spectacle. The special effects looked cool. Then a bluish whirlwind appeared. One of the goblins even ducked down in surprise. The gamer continued to quietly observe this magical process. The spectacle was so mesmerizing that the guy decided that he had to post it. Finally, Alex took the blade out of the vat and began the final steps. At some point, the players thought that all these manipulations looked like elementary fraud. Finally, the blacksmith announced that he was finished, solemnly emphasizing that this was the first buff on the server. Alex again lowered the blade into the vat, as if he intended to wash away everything unnecessary from it. When all the magical actions were completed, the blacksmith handed the weapon to the happy owner. Arthur was in 7th heaven. Finally, he would have a decent blade to protect himself from monsters. The annotation stated that this was a diamond dagger with white equipment. Weapons can be used in the dungeon and in other worlds. Arthur's delight gave way to disappointment. The weapon's appearance hasn't changed at all. The comrades, who had been watching from the side all this time, asked Arthur to let them try the blade. They were interested in whether anything had changed. Arthur turned out to be greedy, not considering it necessary to give his weapons into the wrong hands. Despite the fact that his comrades considered him obligated to show them the blade first, the guy said that he was going to go train himself, because he needed to train his hand. Before Alex could start his work, another gamer approached him. Ronald also wanted to improve his weapon. Unlike Arthur, Dursley decided to go a little further. He asked the blacksmith to add a few additional attributes for him. The guy was very persistent. Ronald spoke incessantly, practically infuriating the blacksmith. The gamer was interested in whether it was possible to make the blade thinner, and he demanded that the blacksmith talk to him. In the end, Alex's patience came to an end, and he kicked Ronald out of the forge as soon as he was done with his weapon. The head of the goblins was not offended by the blacksmith. In the end, his blade was updated and, unlike Arthur, Ronald allowed his comrades to hold his sword in their hands. Comparing the updated boss blade and their old blade, gamers stated that essentially no updates had occurred, despite the fact that their friend paid for this enhancement. Watching the goblins, Sherlock was sure that they were happy with the update, and they liked the new equipment. At this moment, Blue reminded the Lord that it was time to update the official website, but the Lord did not understand what he was talking about. The information on the website needed to be updated. Now there was a mention of a new character, Moros, a skill trainer. There was also a mention that the blacksmith Alex and the skill trainer bought 2 single-occupancy dorms, which players are not allowed to enter. In terms of new items, information has appeared on the site about a diamond shield and spider silk, which can be exchanged for reputation and copper coins. Spider meat and spider legs were also mentioned, with which you can enhance equipment 5 times. Blue clarified that these are the announcements that they made after the launch of the server. The players have already paid attention to them. The assistant also mentioned that there is a preview of the caravan event. Sherlock briefly scanned the system space again. The following message appeared on the screen. The Eternal Kingdom dungeon has been updated, and new content has been added. Sherlock hoped that all this would work. His faithful assistant did not even doubt it. Gamers greeted the update with delight, and therefore they asked to launch a second set of testers. The ruler was also pleased, because people said that under his rule the dungeon acquired a high reputation. Generally speaking, Sherlock shared the opinion of his admirers, because he really did a lot for the development of the dungeon. Suddenly, one strange comment caught the eye of the ruler. It spoke of some kind of secret. Someone under the nickname First Tester claimed to have discovered an amazing secret of the dungeon. A goblin named Grain Grower, while in the forge, accidentally discovered a letter from the blacksmith's younger brother, in which he asked Alex to recommend him to Lord Sherlock. The blacksmith's brother at that time was in a very difficult situation. His work was not going well, so he hoped to get a place next to his older brother. The brother also mentioned that a caravan was heading to the Eternal Kingdom. Most of all, Kleberob was interested in the news about the caravan, and he was in a hurry to share it with everyone who reads it. Sherlock recalled that Alex asked to hire his younger brother, but that's not the topic now. There was a much more important question. The news about the Winterfell caravan heading to the Eternal Kingdom instantly spread throughout the internet. The content on which the Overlord made big bets is now known to the players. Seeing how upset the Lord was, Blue suggested trying to get everything done through the Public Relations Center. Sherlock was ready to listen to his assistant's proposal. Saber didn't see much of a problem, and this post is just a player's logical guess about the upcoming update. Now the answers are already more than 60 pages. The assistant suggested beating gamers, and using this news as advertising, presenting it as a test event. Sherlock was thinking about making another publication, but Blue immediately discarded this idea, because players trust official news more. That's it. The players are now in for a surprise. A new announcement from Sherlock said that a caravan from Winterfell was about to arrive in the dungeon. During this event, the event item exchange function will open. The list of items will be announced later. The reaction of the players, as expected, was very stormy. The players were looking forward to the upcoming event. The Lord was pleased with the result of the scam. In addition, Blue also encouraged that the forum would come to life as soon as the caravan arrived. 2 goblins came out into the dungeon courtyard. They were tired after a hard day, and one of them even joked that they should thank the television for their help. The second goblin reminded him that he needed to go collect the reward. Ronald, meanwhile, asked the goblins if they would like to join the group for mining. Gamers gladly accepted this proposal. Taking advantage of the free time from work, the goblins tried to hone their skills. Luke Chester was no longer afraid of spiders and bravely fought them. Arthur felt an unprecedented surge of strength and courage, thanks to his reinforced blade. The rest of the goblins took an active part in clearing out the spider's lair. The task was complicated by the presence of plants in the dungeon, which also posed a certain danger. However, the mission was completed. The enemy was defeated, and Boss Ronald ordered everyone to collect resources. Today, the goblins were very lucky. But there was also sad news. Some gamers could not withstand the monsters, so the Lord will have to work hard, bringing them all back to life. Sherlock actually seems to be quite busy these days. One after another, the goblins brought the bodies of their dead comrades to the Lord so that he could resurrect them again. Not only the bodies of the dead, but also simply crippled goblins came to the Lord, expecting help from him too. Sherlock looked terribly tired. He had never healed so many wounded and killed people. A little more, and the ruler himself will need help. Blue was very concerned about his master's mental state, but could not help. The Lord was already thinking about hiring a sorcerer to help him treat the goblins. The enthusiasm of the players for the development of the wasteland is too high, and the Overlord simply could not stand it any longer. Blue understood everything, but the dungeon did not have enough budget for this. At that moment, the assistant noticed that a group of people was approaching the dungeon. He called the gentleman to urgently look at it through the mirror. Forgetting about fatigue, the ruler quickly approached his magic mirror. A caravan was approaching the walls of the castle. It was necessary to meet them as it should be. Sherlock went down into the yard and headed towards the gate. The goblins realized that a caravan had arrived and decided to follow the Lord to see everything for themselves. Gamers ran after the Overlord, bombarding him with questions as they went, whether there would be new NPCs and whether he would visit the forum. But the Lord did not react at all. The goblins intended to follow the master through the portal, but a powerful whirlwind abruptly threw them back. The gamers lay on the floor with a terrible headache, regretting that they would not be able to witness the arrival of the caravan with their own eyes. Sherlock calmly approached the gate and began to wait. He looked intently into the distance, expecting the arrival of the guests any minute. Finally, the first cart stopped at the gate, and a young man got out. He said that they were a caravan from Winterfell, and were under the protection of the Trade League. Sherlock introduced himself and added that he had come to greet them personally. The guest bowed politely and introduced himself as Baron Nicholas. He was pleased that the ruler decided to meet them personally. The Lord proposed to discard all formalities and get straight to the point. They needed to discuss something. Next, Sherlock handed Baron Nicholas a letter, inviting him to read it. On the title side of the letter was the inscription, "Dungeon Event, Caravan from Winterfell." Nicholas looked suspiciously at the piece of paper, trying to guess what was inside. The letter contained a list of rules and terms of the transaction. Separate paragraphs indicate not to contact dungeon subordinates and ignore any conversations with them in order to avoid conflicts. The letter also asked to refrain from any questions regarding the Eternal Kingdom dungeon. Nicholas was very surprised by the rules specified in the contract. He is in a trading league and has seen all sorts of dungeons, but he has never seen anything like this. He was especially wary of the paragraph instructing him not to ask questions and ignore excessive curiosity. Nevertheless, the Baron was glad to cooperate. Sherlock, in turn, reciprocated. The next step, Nicholas invited the Lord to familiarize himself with the items of the caravan. First of all, the Baron presented chests with pickaxes for mining gold ore. The cost of the pickaxe was 500 magic stones, but the Baron agreed to the Lord's offer to accept payment in gold ore. The Overlord was more interested in whether Nicholas had goods suitable for the inhabitants of the dungeon. There were such goods, but not many. The Baron pointed to the items lying on the next cart, asking if any of them were suitable. The ruler replied that they were all good, but the choice would still be up to the residents. The next point, the Lord asked if the caravan accepted parts of spiders and killer vines. The Baron answered positively, but clarified that the number of such goods is limited. Taking this opportunity, Nicholas asked if it was true that recently new resources began to appear in the dungeon. Sherlock tried to avoid answering, because the proposals he provided should be enough for the caravan. But the Baron had a different opinion. He explained that he would like to purchase everything, and if there is too much goods, then it will simply go to the Winterfell warehouse. Nicholas also asked to provide him with an assistant. Sherlock would receive 10 magic stones as payment. But the ruler was alarmed by such a request. He reminded that the caravan had its own people for these purposes. The Baron emphasized that the price will increase with each trip, and if Sherlock is ready to help, Then Nicholas will increase the reward to 15 magic stones. The overlord objected that the reward in this situation was too much. But at the same time, he asked whether the stones could be directly exchanged for pickaxes. The goblins were impatiently waiting for the representative of the caravan, together with the ruler, to go inside, and when they saw them, they did not hide their joy. The caravan slowly moved inside the dungeon. The Baron noticed that the Lord's servants were reacting too violently to their appearance. But the ruler calmly replied that they always behave this way, and should not pay special attention to it. Gamers, meanwhile, continued to vigorously express their delight. There were monsters among the representatives of the caravan, and the players were already anticipating how the forum would explode from such news. However, this has already happened. Posts about this appeared one after another. Sherlock tried to calm his goblins, because there was a guest next to him, and the players should follow the rules of etiquette. But despite the warning, the goblins could not control their emotions. They were impatient to look at everything. At this point, the Baron himself could not stand it and abruptly stopped them. But it was too late. One of the goblins had already fallen under the feet of a huge monster. The monster's huge paw literally crushed the careless player. Nicholas was horrified by what he saw. He had just arrived here, and had already killed one of the residents right in front of the Lord. The frightened Baron did not know what to do now. Gamers, unlike the Baron, reacted differently. They were amused that one of them was stepped on by an NPC. Players again admired that the game's effects were amazing. Looking at the reaction of the inhabitants of the land, who rejoiced at the death of one of them, Nicholas was even more shocked. The goblins clearly looked like crazy. Sherlock looked unperturbed at the same time. He simply asked for forgiveness for the carelessness of his servant. Nicholas promised to make a payment to the victim's family. Taking this opportunity, Sherlock said that this would cost the Baron a couple of magic stones. In this case, the goblin's grandparents, as well as his parents, wife, 10 children and paralyzed sister, will not have to worry about food and clothing in the future. Nicholas took Sherlock's condition as a ridiculous joke. After all, in order to feed a family of 20 people, compensation in the amount of at least 5,000 magic stones would be needed. The Baron openly accused Sherlock of making fun of his guest, thinking to himself that the Lord was probably planning to blackmail him in the future. But Sherlock was unperturbed, citing the fact that Nicholas was also having a hard time and therefore he would take 200 stones from him as damage, and the master would cover the rest of the expenses himself. The Baron, in turn, insisted that he would pay several thousand stones as compensation. The Lord wondered whether Nicholas was really going to pay such a colossal sum. On the other hand, the master knew that thousands of people wishing to join his dungeon appeared every day, so he must treat his servants with dignity. With every minute, Sherlock aroused more and more suspicion in Nicholas. The Baron assumed that the owner of this dungeon was either a big liar or a real villain. Considering the eccentric rules of the master and his insane servants, Nicholas was inclined to believe that Sherlock was still a villain. Besides, no matter how poor this demon was, he would not lie about 200 magic stones. In the end, to put an end to this misunderstanding, Nicholas gave Sherlock 200 stones and suggested that they move on directly to preparing the goods. Everyone is waiting. At the same time, the Baron wondered whether it is so easy to blackmail people these days. A quarter of an hour later, Saber announced that the Chamber of Commerce event had begun. The announcement stated that the famous vampire Baron Nicholas would only be staying here for 3 days. So during this time, residents were given the opportunity to exchange precious materials for materials from the beast. The list of brought items included a Winterfell shortbow, a dagger, clothes, and various accessories. Nicholas was mainly interested in whether his product had any special conditions. Sherlock did not give a clear answer, only reminded the Baron not to forget about the 5th clause of the contract. The vampire remembered that the 5th clause of the contract stated to refrain from any questions regarding the Eternal Realm dungeon. The gamers were delighted. The event began. The caravan brought with it a lot of things and also cool equipment. The Baron wondered if these guys would be able to make out what was written here. Gamers looked at the product with interest. The short bow was a little expensive. The dagger was more powerful than the one they already had, although the one they brought looked somewhat tasteless. The clothes seemed absolutely useless to Ronald, but Arthur objected, emphasizing that he could afford to buy himself a tuxedo. Most goblins did not have enough resources to buy these things. Ronald decided to cheer up his low-income comrades. He needed to organize a raid and get resources for himself. Arthur again boasted of having money, offering to give him a bow or bags in exchange for copper coins. One of the goblins responded sarcastically, suggesting that Arthur hire a team and pay them 100 coins per hour. Nicholas became an involuntary witness to these conversations. He asked Sherlock what they were talking about. In response, the Overlord again recalled the fifth rule of the contract. The vampire's mistrust grew more and more. In the end, he decided to wait and find out what this demon was up to. At this moment, Rainty approached Arthur. He decided to exchange his cloth bag for copper coins. Arthur immediately handed him his bag of coins in return. Both gamers were happy with the exchange. Arthur had an item to store, and Rainty finally felt rich. The deal between the two gamers did not escape the prying eyes of Nicholas, and he again asked Sherlock what was wrong with his servants, and whether these coins were really so valuable. But the master once again reminded the guest of the fifth rule of the contract. The vampire realized that he would not achieve the truth by pretending to agree. The companions wished each other good luck, and Sherlock left. An hour later, Nicholas was approached by his servant. He told his master that he had discovered something strange. It turns out that these goblins are very strong in battle. They unite in teams and are even able to kill creepy vines. The Baron was surprised because goblins have always been considered an inferior species. At this moment, the goblins were just returning to the dungeon. Gamers shared their impressions with each other, laughing merrily. The new event energized them so much that they were ready to work all night for resources. The vampire's close attention did not escape Ronald's eyes, and he told his comrades about it. In general, the guys decided that Nicholas was waiting for them to launch a new plot. The goblins approached the Baron and directly asked if he had a new plot for them. The guys did not hesitate to discuss Nicholas and his subjects. The vampire was terribly indignant, reminding them that they were low creatures, and he was a noble Baron. But gamers responded that they didn't care who he was. The main thing was that they had a new story ahead of them. Suddenly, Ronald came up with a crazy idea. He suggested cutting the guest with a sword and checking whether a new plot would appear. Nicholas was shocked. These goblins are not at all afraid of the vampire, relying only on their strength. Suddenly it dawned on the Baron that these goblins were simply confident in Sherlock's strength, which is why they were behaving so brazenly. The vampire understood that the Demon Lord was actually not so simple, so it would be right to make friends with him as soon as possible. After thinking for a while, Nicholas put on a friendly smile and went straight to Sherlock, enthusiastically assuring that he could not wait any longer and wanted to discuss their cooperation. Gamers, looking at this scene, concluded that this was the start of a new plot. Approaching Sherlock, the Baron politely bowed his head and said that he was intrigued by the Goblin Warriors and decided to invest in the Eternal Kingdom dungeon. Gamers were quite surprised that the vampire praised them in the presence of the Lord, which meant that he had a trained eye. The players were sure that they had discovered some kind of hidden quest. The vampire advised the Demon Lord to join the Alliance of Underground Cities. As a result, Sherlock will have free access to teleportation gates, periodic visits to merchants, and sharing of resources. As for the payment, the demon will only need a little gold from his reserves. Sherlock thought about it. Such a proposal would reduce all costs, but the player's interaction with the Alliance could bring a lot of problems, and now is not the time for this. So the best solution is to just get rid of this guy. After thinking a little, the ruler replied that he was forced to refuse. He already has enough money. In addition, Sherlock said that he had already entered into an agreement with another team until next year. Nicholas was now absolutely sure that Sherlock was rich, which meant that he urgently needed to establish relations with this demon. The Baron handed the Demon Lord his card, saying that since his offer was not relevant, then in this case he would simply give him 1,000 magic stones as a token of gratitude for his hospitality. Sherlock didn't show it, but mentally he was quite surprised at such a generous offering. What kind of hospitality can we talk about if he forced the guest to sleep on the floor? And if the Lord had not been sure that there were really real stones on the map, he would have decided that the vampire wanted to insult him. The Lord smiled politely, muttering that such a gift was not entirely acceptable. In response, the vampire handed him a scroll, explaining that it was a teleportation scroll with which Sherlock could send his resources, and the people in Winterfell would immediately receive them. Nicholas was shocked by this behavior of the Demon Lord. The vampire was surprised that he received 1,000 stones, and no one demanded payment from him for transportation. Citing being busy, the Baron prepared to leave, reminding that gold and other resources should be delivered within 3 days. Sherlock thanked Nicholas for his generosity, promising that he would never forget it. Leaving Sherlock, the Baron smiled joyfully. He was pleased that the demon recognized him. The goblins watched the vampire from around the corner. They were confident that a new arc was beginning in the narrative. But one way or another, everything will become clear in 3 days. 3 days later, the caravan departed back. Sherlock personally came out to see them off, asking them to say goodbye to Baron Nicholas. The goblins were wondering when the next event would happen and what happened to Baron Nicholas. Some gamers were upset that they were unable to collect the necessary materials. Soon the Overlord decided to go to Winterfell, asking Blue to send a notification. A system announcement notified players that Lord Sherlock would be leaving for a short time, and therefore the spawn system would be under maintenance. Players were warned to stay out of harm's way. It was also stated that each player will receive 200 reputation points and 100 coins as compensation. The goblins were upset at first, but then they decided not to waste time, but to lay bricks. Some gamers offered the web, promising to upgrade the equipment. Upon arrival at Winterfell, Sherlock was met at the teleportation gate by Baron Nicholas's butler. The Lord handed the butler a list of the cargo, offering to check if everything was in place. But the butler replied that this was not necessary. The Baron said that he trusted Sherlock. In addition, the servant gave the demon 5,000 magic stones. Sherlock was delighted with this service. The butler asked if the Lord needed anything else, because they had everything he wanted. The servant also warned that they would sell the goods to the demon lord at a 20% discount. Sherlock was interested in 100 beds. He asked how much it would cost him. The servant replied that the Lord would meet the cost of 800 stones with delivery. In addition, the butler said that they have houses for carpenters, costing 180 stones each, and the carpenters themselves are also offered. The ruler gladly accepted the offer. He needed both. On top of that, Sherlock needed a carpenter who could cook. The butler replied that they had exactly what the sovereign needed, and promised to personally handle the delivery. In general, everything was great. The only thing the Lord was worried about was that they spent a lot of money, and whether the players would like such houses. Blue, as always, reassured his master, because the master could not even imagine how obsessed gamers were with personal things. Blue looked away from the conversation about shopping for a second, listening to something. The next moment, Blue announced that the players were in danger, and they urgently needed to return to the dungeon. Sherlock became wary, not even guessing what could happen there and how urgent this matter was. Saber said that, after he sent the notification, there was still a group of goblins left in the caves. That was the problem. At the same moment, new monsters appeared in the cave next to the goblins. Among them was the long-tailed banshee, and in all likelihood, she was much stronger than the spider. Gamers were frightened by the sight of a monster with a strange human form, but at the same time assumed that a banshee would be more useful than a spider's head. The appearance of the monster looked fascinating. At first glance, it was a beautiful creature, although quite dangerous. She was surrounded by maids no less beautiful. They were all armed. One of the queen's servants took out a whip and tried to hit the goblins. Gamers assumed that this was a new storyline, but nevertheless rushed to run, guessing that this creature was too dangerous. However, the monster woman turned out to be surprisingly dexterous. The blow of her whip still reached its target. The queen was armed with a huge mace. She did not spare anyone. The blow of her weapon reached each of the goblins who disturbed her. The surviving goblins fled as fast as they could. The instinct of self-preservation turned out to be much stronger than their usual curiosity in such cases. Fortunately, some gamers still managed to escape to a safe distance, barely taking a breath. They stated that this time, they had bothered to meet the boss of the monsters. Moreover, this boss single-handedly swept them all away. But even despite the danger, the situation was interesting for them. Blue tried to convey to the Lord that at the moment everyone is waiting for him to take control of the situation. Sherlock was close to despair. Problems rained down on him one after another. Saber, as usual, saw benefit even in such a deplorable situation. He hinted that even in this case they could turn the situation to their advantage. Sherlock wearily asked what exactly could be done in such a difficult situation. Blue suggested using this opportunity and completing the main task in the storyline. With this task, they will make players feel a sense of duty and destiny, because it is very motivating. The Lord did not quite understand what they were talking about, being sure that their sense of duty was to serve their Lord. This was the plan from the very beginning. Saber objected, explaining that players might not consider serving the Lord something important, and with the help of this quest, they will begin to serve the ruler even more zealously. The assistant had an idea. If saving the world is too difficult a task for gamers, then you can choose the theme, Defense of the Motherland. Then, in order to protect the dungeon from the attack of the Banshee, they will tirelessly lay out bricks and train. The assistant's plan looked quite convincing. The master asked what he needed to do for this. Blue explained that they first needed to purchase arrows to ensure the player's fighting power. The assistant will then issue a notification. Sherlock was forced to agree. Now all that remained was to find the butler Baron Nicholas. The demon agreed with Blue. If the players were not motivated, then he would not be able to realize the dream of developing the dungeon. Half an hour has passed. Sherlock walked silently along the deserted street of the dungeon. Blue waited patiently, but the master's thoughts were somewhere far away. The goblins were delighted at the return of the Lord. They were sure that the owner was up to something, and most likely it had something to do with the Banshee. At the same time, a new system notification appeared, informing about another quest. Gamers were tasked with destroying the Banshee tribe and protecting the Eternal Kingdom from the Claymore boss. The reward depended on the level of the player's contribution. An ordinary gamer would receive 100 copper coins, an outstanding one, 300 copper coins, and the best one would receive 1 silver coin. The hint for completing the mission said that despite the fact that Claymore Banshees are considered cruel and strong creatures, they are afraid of the power of Lord Sherlock, so they dare to come close to the dungeon, but will mercilessly attack anyone who goes outside the safe zone. It was also reported that the long-tailed Banshee could be used to obtain combat equipment and various items that could be exchanged for coins. You can get licensed equipment for the Claymore boss, but you will have to pay for the license in coins, and the player must also have the required number of reputation points. While some gamers were happy about the new quest, others were upset. Everything looked too difficult, because Claymore is so strong. And while some players began laying out bricks in order to later purchase equipment, others confidently headed to the Banshee's lair. Sherlock was glad that, thanks to the new quest, the player's motivation had increased noticeably. He praised his assistant for the idea. The Overlord was sure that the players would go through the quest in a cycle. Attack the Banshee's lair, then work, then attack again. But Blue did not agree with this because gamers are much smarter than they seem. Suddenly, Ronald approached Sherlock. He asked to give the gamers at least some information regarding Banshee, but the Lord replied that he knew nothing about her. Realizing that there was no point in asking the Lord, the goblins decided to find out the information they needed from a blacksmith or trainer. Blue explained to Sherlock that this behavior of gamers is quite normal. They need to collect tips on how to defeat the Claymore boss, because it is better to collect all the information in advance than to try to navigate at the most difficult moment. Luke Chester was entrusted with questioning Alex. The guy was trying to find out what the Banshee tribe was because the blacksmith took part in many adventures when he was young and could know something. Instead of answering, the blacksmith forcefully brought his hammer down on Luke's sword, saying that it was now broken. 2 hours later, Alex stood in the Lord's office, trying to find out who this Banshee was. He intended to kill her. Sherlock immediately guessed that the goblins were provoking the blacksmith again. The blacksmith, unable to control his anger, admitted to the Overlord that he told the goblins that the Banshee was not a particularly advanced life form, but the goblins interrogated him for another 2 hours. The Lord felt sorry for his employee. He apologized for the gamers and promised to increase the blacksmith's salary, asking him not to say anything to the goblins in the future. The gentleman's attention was distracted by Blue. The assistant reported that the players had developed a new mod. The goblins were extremely serious. They had swords in their hands and courage and determination in their eyes. Sherlock wanted to know what it all meant. Saber said that they were going on an adventure. The goblins challenged a boss they had never faced before. They fought for the dungeon. Banshees were incredibly strong. Many goblins were defeated. Some even realized that they were dying. This behavior angered Sherlock. The players simply gave him more work. Blue explained that in other worlds, many bosses fight like this, and with this strategy, they could defeat everyone. For a moment, it seemed to Saber that Sherlock no longer liked these players, especially their stupid nicknames. So the assistant suggested that the Lord just watch what was happening. Despite the difficulties, Ronald still managed to figure out something. He learned that the Banshees are not mentally connected to the boss, and if you divert the attention of at least a few Banshees, the gamers will be able to defeat them, especially since there are only 40 of them and their IQ level is quite low. They do not know how to act together. Thus, the goblins had only one serious opponent, the boss Claymore, and she alone was capable of defeating them all. Gamers had a good chance of dealing with the rest of the Banshees. Ronald proposed to arrange sabotage, and for this, it is necessary to appoint a person in charge. In the end, those who wanted to take responsibility quickly made up their minds. Sherlock continued to watch his goblins. Blue explained that sabotage is an action that can be used to divert the monster's attention. The person responsible for the sabotage tried to provoke the monsters, and his tactics worked. They fell for it. Having achieved his goal, the gamer rushed to run. The banshees rushed after him. Unfortunately, this battle could not do without casualties, but gamers did not give up. While the saboteur in charge ducked, the other goblins simultaneously fired arrows. The warriors did not budge despite the danger. They were only interested in victory. The banshees moved closer and closer, but the goblins continued to attack. One of the banshees was already dead. 3 days later, none of the banshees were left alive. Boss Claymore was left all alone. Lord Sherlock and Blue were delighted with the goblins. The Overlord admitted that in reality, these guys turned out to be quite smart. In fact, many more surprises awaited him. At some point, the players decided to take a break. Sherlock didn't understand why this was so, but everything was simpler. Like Blue said, they're probably sitting on the forum discussing tactics. The Overlord decided to personally read the comments and was once again convinced that players like to discuss such topics. Ronald Dursley wrote that a new storyline had finally begun, but it was very difficult. They fought and died 4 rounds in a row, which is demoralizing. Dursley believed that there was nothing wrong with death. The problem was monetary compensation. The purchase of equipment cost them 50,000 coins. So even hardened donors were forced to do hard physical work. This time Ronald's report was short. He said he was going offline with the goal of developing a plan to defeat Claymore. Sherlock was pleased that all players were contributing to the development of the dungeon. To please the master even more, Blue announced that the arrows and carpenters' houses had been delivered. Construction was in full swing, and the goblins were happily mastering the skills of carpenters. The servant who delivered the goods asked for forgiveness that the search for carpenters would take a little time, hoping that the master would treat the situation with understanding. Sherlock said that he was not pushing anyone and asked him to say hi to Nicholas. Coming out to the goblins, the Lord hastened to please them. Knowing that they were going to attack Claymore, he said that he had ordered a new batch of arrows for them, and in order to acquire them, he needed to continue to work hard. The goblins were happy with such news. They ran out of arrows 3 days ago. Now Claymore will definitely be defeated. Sherlock was pleased that this storyline worked perfectly. An hour later, a strategy for attacking the leader of the Banshee tribe, Boss Claymore, appeared on the forum. Lord admitted that Stephen Murdoch was indeed effective. Stephen recorded a video in which he intended to detail the strategy. The guy said that when they fought with spiders and banshees, they found out that each mob in this game is unique, and each of them has developed a special skill, just like in real life. The blogger explained that Claymore's main attack is a hammer blow. One of the strategy points was that when she took a breather, players could take advantage of the moment and attack her. Archers must stay as close to the target as possible and be sure to aim carefully. The gaps between the armor are the weak point of the Claymore. In addition, her face and some parts of her body are not covered at all. Next, the blogger provided a detailed documented plan. After this, everyone participating was required to log in after 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, the goblin warriors were heading towards Claymore's lair. The guys tried to encourage each other. The main thing is not to die quickly and try to dodge her attacks. For a while, Claymore calmly looked at the goblins, in no hurry to attack. The goblin saboteur tried to divert her attention in advance. The warriors behind him tensely waited for the right moment to shoot at their target. The saboteur boldly looked the monster straight in the eyes, awakening incredible anger in her. Unfortunately, a sharp and unexpected blow from Claymore's hammer stopped the efforts of the daredevil. Claymore looked calm. Her blows were accurate and powerful. The loss of their comrade angered the goblins even more. Now, they simply had to defeat the monster. While Claymore was attacking others, Luke Chester tried to strike the monster in an unprotected place. The attempt to strike did not go unnoticed. Claymore's attention was turned to Chester. The deadly beauty tried to attack the goblin, but he deftly dodged. Having seen firsthand that the tactics worked, Ronald decided to repeat the same actions as Luke. Clymer was distracted again, but Ronald was unlucky. A blow from a hammer took his life. Although, by the way, he is no stranger to dying for the umpteenth time. The death of the commander greatly demoralized the team. They froze in confusion in place. But it was necessary to take the body of the murdered man for the next resurrection. All the reproaches went to the archers, who could not get to the right place. And Luke came into play again. He boldly approached the monster at a critically close distance and struck in the right place. The guy sincerely considered himself cool. Chester was in no hurry to step aside, enjoying his superiority in this game. Claimer was furious, throwing punches everywhere. Gamers again needed some kind of diversion. The monster scattered the goblins without feeling any threat from them. The defeat of the players was already close. Watching the battle of his goblins, Sherlock noticed the expression of NT. He asked his assistant what it meant. Blue explained that this is a slang expression among no-tank gamers, meaning that players who distract the enemy's attention in battle cause him to become aggressive, thereby diverting attention to himself. Alas, Claimer's hammer also reached Luke Chester. The poor guy also died, but at the last moment, he still distracted the monster's attention. The goblins took the opportunity to shoot several arrows at Claimer. 4 hours later, Boss Claimer was finally defeated, her body lying motionless on the ground, surrounded by goblins exhausted from a long battle. The mission was accomplished. The players loaded the monster's body onto a stretcher and headed into the dungeon. The only thing that surprised them was why they didn't receive the reward instantly, because they were entitled to special equipment. Saber was curious about the Lord's plans for the reward, because if it wasn't very good, it would ruin the player's mood. Sherlock understood this, but in addition to everything else, he had another way to squeeze more coins out of gamers. The Overlord intended to auction off the equipment received from the boss and impose a 20% tax on it. Saber was unpleasantly surprised. The paid reward, and even the tax, was too much. The assistant quipped, "Is Sherlock really that demonic?" The Lord proudly confirmed that he was not just a demon, but a higher demon. First of all, the Lord went to the blacksmith to find out how much equipment he could make from the hammer and claymore armor. Alex figured that would be 3 weapons and 3 sets of armor. Sherlock was primarily interested in weapons. It was necessary to make a sword, a hammer, and a dagger. The Lord was interested in how long it would take. The blacksmith needed 1 day for this. The Lord wished Alex to get to work immediately. Blue decided to slightly correct the master's idea, suggesting that the equipment should have a unique function of binding the soul. Otherwise, if players suddenly lose their weapons, they may become angry or lose motivation. Sherlock agreed with the assistant, leaving the magical part to him. Saber had to work on the soul-binding spell. The Lord himself was going to send a notification in order to maintain the interest of the players. The system notification stated that materials received after defeating the boss, as well as the reward for updating the game, would be distributed among players. Details will be announced tomorrow, and the auction will be held the day after that. The function of the new equipment will be to bind the soul. The equipment cannot be lost. While the goblins were carrying bricks, Arthur and Ronald announced that they would buy the coins for the highest price. The less fortunate gamers looked completely downcast. They wanted to at least get beds. Feeling the decadent mood, the Overlord decided to slightly cheer up the goblins, promising that beds and a carpenter would soon arrive, who would teach them how to build houses. Soon a surprise awaited everyone in the dungeon. The surprise turned out to be a girl. She had a wooden hammer in her hand. The girl introduced herself as a new carpenter named Cindy. In her hand she held a contract for 3 months. The appearance of the new NPC was liked by the goblins, and they were looking forward to the appearance of a new storyline. Sherlock greeted the new carpenter, warning in advance that the Eternal Realm was different from other places. The Lord invited the girl to meet the blacksmith, who would bring her up to date. To Sherlock's surprise, Alex and Cindy were not only acquaintances, but also cousins. After the question of dating disappeared on its own, the master only had to find out whether Cindy could cook. The girl assured that she was not only a professional carpenter, but also an excellent cook.